about 1:15 or so, we'll move on to the second session, and we'll do kind of a rush on that one, so that we can actually start looking at the panel maybe starting at around 2 o'clock. Because Kathy Farrell is leaving us at 3 o'clock. We'll have a group photograph at 2:45 outside, and then so that we can include everybody. And then we'll come back in and we'll continue on with the panel discussion if need be. And then we'll continue on this evening if we want more time to get the full session. Does that sound okay? All right. And considering that Group 3 did some artistry work here, I'm going to have Group 3 go.
Group 1.
Oh, that's Group 1. Sorry.
No, Group 3 had the brilliance. No,
I was looking at, okay, these are the same. Okay, yeah. We'll start with Group 1 then. Okay. Now, who's talking about Group 1? Okay.
Here comes our voice.
Turn the lights on. Dawn, can you turn the lights on before you start?
Bring it forward.
When we started the discussion, the first word that jumped out to our group.
I can't hear you very well.
Is
Dawn, we can't hear you back here. Dawn,
yeah.
we can't hear you back.
Oh.
Military voice, Don. Military voice.
I don't have one. Use the mic.
Yeah. If it's,
That one is.
Yep, you just mic up. Yep, but although.
Okay.
all right, just take it off.
Take it off the
Take it off and stand.
Of course, the introvert got asked to do this.
Doing great. Doing great.
Somebody has to.
Before Gail started our beautiful.
Turn it on.
Yeah. Before Gail started our beautiful drawing here, the group was already discussing our little sentence at the bottom, and the word that jumped out was dovetail. And someone asked, what does dovetail mean? And can you do the demonstration?
There you go.
So, that was what I said, we mesh together. And when we do that, when you're making cabinets and anything like that, it makes a very strong joint. So it makes a very strong connection. And that is what we need between our ordained ministry and our lay ministry, the people that are involved in these functions, is that we need to get that connection where we work together and we work in harmony, and we are aware of the boundaries that exist, but we're working also with keeping in mind that the people we serve, they need the Eucharist. And there are many parishes where the priest may not be able to come and bless, break bread, and pardon for months at a time. So we can pray. And I know I was in a parish in Cold Lake, Alberta, where we didn't often have priests. But every lay minister prayed to have a priest. But in the meantime, we're praying, but are we serving the needs of the person in the needs of the people? Now, we talked a bit about how some lay ministers are licensed to bring communion to nursing homes, the reserved sacrament, where we go through a prayer, which I haven't done it for many years, but I don't know if I still have a license, but I have done it. And we were able to bring that sacrament to the people who are shut in. So we're serving maybe 2 or 3 people out of 50 that way. Is there a way that licensed lay ministers could serve the people in the pews where we cannot have a priest? And I'm talking about a parish that hasn't seen a priest for years. Is there some way that we talked about levels? And how do we respect the boundaries, but how do we also respect the needs of the parishioner or the Eucharist? And is there anything else I should say?
Communication.
Yeah, we talked about communication in the parish, how important it was between the lay ministers and the ordained the clergy. That level of communication, how, what a person can do and what a person cannot do. How do we do that graciously that respects all of the people that are involved in lay ministry? There are some people who their gifts do not extend to doing home visits or pastoral care, that their gifts are reading, doing the readings, their gifts are for leading the prayers. And how do we make them feel that that is of great value, but not load that other responsibility on them of pastoral care? And
I remember when we were talking about how somehow we're shut out, and so the integration part of getting everybody involved,
yeah, that
the way the nurse practitioner and that.
yeah, we talked about what we talking about medical profession and how there are different levels, but and how could we integrate that into ministry that serves the needs of all? That's perfect.
Thank you.
Can we go with group 2 next? I think what this will do is it gives us some feedback for the panel discussion.
Yes.
So we'll just get your ideas at this point in time. Group 2, which one just come up and do a presentation?
Nobody's group two. Come on with me then.
All right, so group 2, we kind of talked about challenges we have within our parishes. We talked a lot about nursing homes and pastoral care, kind of, how that's one of our responsibilities. And then we also kind of talked about the structure of licensed lay ministers, how we need to have, I think we mirrored a lot of communication from one. We talked about communication regionally, how can we leverage our different gifts. I don't think we use the word gifts at all in our conversation, but we talked about it. We talked about, just because I know that, St. Peter's, I think, is it St. Peter's in Eastern Passage? Has like a youth dance once a month, but they don't ever see any of those people in church. So how do we kind of plant that seed with those people, and how that's a special gift that maybe someone in the diocese has that we could use on a diocesan level. So not being islands in a stream, kind of just really cooperating more. So that was a lot of our conversation.
Group number 3.
One of the things that we identified was,
Your microphone.
oh, the microphone.
It's on the stand again.
Testing.
One of the things we talked about was that rather than being licensed by the rector, could we be licensed by the diocese reporting to an archdeacon or priest in charge? which would give the ability to serve a larger area, not just one church. You could maybe have a service at a senior's home if you had a different kind of license. We suggest one of the things that we could do as lay ministers is explore alternative ministries, a different service, a different outreach to the community that we could lead. That led to 3, the leadership of community gatherings, organizing a card night, organizing a game night, that kind of thing. And I think the important thing here to recognize is, yes, we may get a lot of the community and we may never see them in church, but the key there is we may not see them in our church. They could go to whatever their faith, but it might make them return. That we perhaps could get some help discerning our gifts not currently identified. We all have an obvious gift, but there might be one laying underneath that would be helpful. And how do we discern that? How do we figure it out? The use of reserved sacraments for services, not just home and hospital. Even if you don't have a priest, if the archdeacon of the area could come in and bless a quantity of the host and the wine, that we could then have a service with the sacrament in it. To explore the uses of technology in ministries, the pluses and the minuses. What would be most useful and what should we avoid? And to explore other needs in the community to be able to help more. Find out what's in your community and then maybe develop a ministry around it.
Very good.
And group number 4.
I'm a teacher, can everybody hear me?
Number 5. Number 4.
Number 5.
Yeah, we'll go.
I'm here because I had to get this out because we had a totally different perspective. I want to shake it up a bit.
Come on, Maxie.
Okay, so what we were looking at was the whole community that gathers on the Sunday. And we were saying we're not using is not the right word, we are not empowering our people to use their gifts. There are prophets among us. And when they speak out, sometimes we don't want to hear them. That's always been the case. We've got a lot of Bible passages on that. But those people need to be heard. And we need to keep an open mind in our parishes. And take time not only to hear them, because, and even if it's something we don't want to hear, but take time to pray on it. God will lead us. So that's the first thing. We don't want a passive parish where everybody says, that's for the minister. When the minister comes, the minister will bring everybody in and we're all going to be well. That's not going to happen. The other thing is we learn from each other. We teach each other in how we relate to each other. So from our experiences, our lived experiences, our faith, sharing our stories, and recognizing other stories, and I've heard many stories here today already, which are awe-inspiring. We are constantly learning new things. So it's getting everybody to talk about their witness. What have you done? I've heard somebody say that today. It wasn't in our group, but somebody saying, well, what have you actually done to further the kingdom? We're all helpers. And this was an incident that actually happened in my sphere of work, where somebody was hanging around. The ladies were in the kitchen and they were getting stuff done. This other person was hanging around. What's that person hanging around? You know, we were so busy with, and it was pointed out to those people that the hanger-on wanted to help. The hanger-on wanted to do the work. and that person was invited in. But originally, it was just a nuisance. So helper, everybody starts somewhere, and you've got to take their hand and walk them into it. And that doesn't mean, we need a treasurer, you're good with numbers, join the team. No, what it is, I need some help counting, or I have a list, or I have something. Will you help me look it over because you're good at that? You'll see the mistakes and take it from there. And sometimes people are going to say no. In fact, most people say no. But that's okay, because we have to respect that not everybody feels called or even sees that they're being called. So, you know, it's being sensitive. But we are role models. Administrators are the glue. They are the organizers. Nobody sees the work of administrators for the most part, but if you don't have a good administrator, everything falls apart. Everybody needs lists, everybody needs to do things to do. So recognize these gifts and ask them for help within the guidelines. Make sure they're following all of the proper rules. Speakers in tongues, as Reverend Tom said, communications. Good communication is the biggie, right? Say what you need to say, but be clear about it so everybody understands. And finally, we all work miracles. God uses us to work miracles. And so with God's leading, we can help make miracles happen in our parishes, but it starts with community and working together and identifying everybody's skills. So thank you very much. I just had to get that out.
I'm not looking at So sometime.
No, not yet.
No? There. Either too loud or too quiet? Good. So, we didn't make a big board, but I said, you know what, let's keep it to 3 main points that kind of floated around in the discussion. In group 4, they kind of relate to everything kind of said so far, and I'm actually glad you went up, Maxine, because I'm like, gosh, that's like going to segue into the finale, or this poster finale that I have.
Bring us home, Jordan.
I will. So I think I'm going to say from the presentation that Tom did, order out of chaos and fill it in with life. And you mentioned that order out of chaos is the rector, and fill it in with life is the priest. And when I look at that on my paper now, I think, okay, I guess the laity and the lay ministers are the ones who are like the apostrophe. We bring the two together. And one of the ways I think we need to make more use of that is also by being able to set boundaries between clergy, rectors, and the laity and other lay ministers. And doing that by, before we even think about what gifts do we have, in enterprise design thinking at IBM, which I guess they tell us they invented it, you try to fall in love with the problem or see what's the grand ideas you have instead of just focusing on the problem. Kind of like what Maxine said, not saying, okay, you're good at that, do that. You just kind of throw everything on a wall and you choose from the sticky notes, digitally or physically, what people think may be the best idea as a group. And one of the things that really kind of stuck the first and the last point together was enabling training just across the board for lay ministers, using the resources of priests and rectors, because at St. James Armdale we have an honorary assistant priest and a rector. And I love Brenda and Katie because they just like almost some way opposites, but they come together really well and doing things. And I'm like, you know what, I love that. And we should do that as lay ministers between those two, along with parishioners, because we will probably be listened to a bit better by other parishioners sometimes than a clergy. I say, and I mean, Kathy, Sandra, and others who know me and my family would probably know that when my mom or my dad says, do this, Jordan, I'm like, no. I'm like, you should do this. I'm like, okay, maybe. And then someone either them or someone else in the St. James community, Wayne or Don, he's like, you know what? I think they had a good idea, you should do that. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. That's kind of the way it goes. Sometimes you don't want to listen to your leaders and your authority figures. But I think we need to respect them, because I look at wider economic and political society, and when we're not respecting our leaders, barriers come up between people. They don't want to listen to you, you don't want to listen to them. And I think by training people and making use of Atlantic School theology and other resources across the church and outside of the church, I think we can enable a lot of our talents and responsibilities to come out naturally, just by being given the basics. And then I'd say, well, like Maxine said, then I think the strengths and weaknesses will bubble up naturally. You know, I mentioned that I'm kind of being asked to do lay pastoral visiting, and Katie and others have seen a gift for gab, at least, to have conversations with people. Unfortunately, I do business, so I like to be up here. But I also love to be one-on-one with someone and just, you know, having a gab. And so find your strengths and weaknesses. Some people are not meant for pastoral visiting, but maybe doing it just in case, having the training for it is great. And it's also about knowing your play, as we say in consulting, or your value add. I mean, I hate value add, that's what I thought, but the play was something, what are we playing? What are we playing out? I think that's, you know, exactly what everyone's been saying as well. And remembering also with boundaries and your strengths and weaknesses, that a lot of lay ministers were mostly volunteers, like many parishioners. And we're not always employees, and I know the role of part-time and volunteer clergy even is expanding. And I think we all need to kind of work together and be somewhat more, I'm trying to find a word, flat organizational structure in a way. And I think the via media, one reason I love Anglicanism, we don't really have a pope for the whole world. But neither do we just kind of have a community church that pops up with someone without a ministry background coming and preaching and doing sacraments. And I think that via media has to be respected. Yeah, and that, I mean, going on longer, Brenda says, Jordan, I'm wanting you to do a talk, not a sermon. But unfortunately, it always ends up being a sermon anyway.
Actually, a lot of the comments this afternoon actually segue quite nicely into our second session. They really do segue nicely into our second section. So what I'm going to propose, I'm going to show you the presentation there. We're going to break into our groups for about a half hour. I'm going to give you both sets of questions at the same time. I was going to divide it into two separate, but I think you've already covered on a lot of these points. And then we'll regather here 1:45. So anyway, I'll make a very, very quick presentation, and then we'll break into our groups for a half hour.
She has to be your first there. You never know if people carry you first.
Everyone's still nervous about the toilet paper. That's funny. And I'll just ask someone to pass these out. Should
Give them to somebody in the end.
Yeah. Dennis, I'll leave that with you.
Pass them back. Take one, pass them back. Already copied. Sit back in my book here.
And I'm next week.
Any extras left over?
We need some over here. We're still coming. Okay. There's more coming. I'm working.
I didn't keep one for myself, so I should probably have one.
Really? No, have one of those?
There we go, thank you.
I can't get my fingers on it either. You guys need them too? I think we're gonna be. There must be some, oh, there's still some coming up there, isn't there?
Are there any left? Oh, I think we're out.
Okay, just hold on, I think there's more here.
I'll get one.
All right. I don't think I need it, I don't think I have to put it on the speaking area. And just to kind of go over both sets, they're on this side. But the first part we were going to look at was the duties and the training, the duties of the licensed lay minister. And under the direction of the rector and the bishop, the licensed lay minister may be called upon to read the appointed lessons and prayers in the church, conduct the service of morning or evening prayer, not including the absolution and benediction, read the litany, order of compline, service for young people and other approved services, conduct in the case of an emergency the baptism of any person in danger of death or the burial of the dead, preach a sermon, gather and prepare candidates for confirmation, who, before they are presented, the bishop shall be examined by a priest, support the aims and works of a parish, Christian education, youth work, stewardship, carry out other duties when specifically requested by the rector, exercise responsible stewardship of time, talent, and treasure, and assist in the distribution of the elements of the communion service to shut-ins when authorized through a special license by the bishop. These discussion group questions, and as I say, we'll kind of roll them all together. What skill sets do you bring to exercise to your duties as a licensed lay minister? Which of the duties have you not performed? Which of the duties do you feel comfortable doing? And where do you excel personally? Is the expectation in your parish that everyone fulfills the same duties? And if not, are there different duties specialized by different people? How is that decided? Is there anything that might be added to the list or modified in the list that would better reflect the practices of your parish? And is there anything we're not doing that perhaps we should be doing? More? Then we have education and training. The instruction shall include attendance at courses specifically for licensed lay ministers in the following areas of study: biblical foundations, doctrine and church history, the Book of Common Prayer and the Book of Alternative Services, basic preaching skills and sermon preparation, spiritual discipline, prayer, devotional life, discernment. And supervised practical training in a parish setting. Candidates will develop a variety of skills, interests, sensibilities to assist in their participation in the areas of Christian activity cited below. An ability to read and speak in public and to explain spiritual concepts in a language suitable to the listening audience, an understanding of Christian stewardship, a willingness to participate in and through and to facilitate Christian education, an understanding of evangelism, social awareness, and Christian service. All licensed lay ministers shall respond to the Lord's call to serve the church. Questions revolving around training. Most training for a licensed lay minister happens in a parish and is acquired by doing. What kind of training did you receive, and what areas of training would better equip you for ministry, and where are the gaps? Probably where are the gaps are probably where, yes, that would be the main focus. And perhaps in the first set of questions, is there anything we're doing, not doing? I'll send you off into your groups. As I say, we'll talk about this in about a half hour, and we'll bring everybody back in. Does that sound okay? All right.
I'm just gonna hand you. be back in the worst. They have these. I was waiting for my draft here. I was waiting for. Next time you have a parish, make sure you do.
George.
Well, and how did you kind of know where they are, but also. Oh, hi.
Thanks for getting up and reading.
Oh, thank you.
Well done, huh?
I forgot to mention, because when they mentioned about identifying gifts, I knew you were mentioning that as well. I had seen it up there.
This one needs, I think this one needs to be.
I think we need to be. When he said to focus on where the gaps in education and question number 4, is there anything we're not doing that we should be doing?
One of the questions there, is there anything I didn't realize that we could.
Yeah, and there's no
It's only an emergency.
Yeah. But the burial of the dead, that doesn't.
Lots to talk about.
No, I'm buried. Yes, I have two.
It is, yeah.
Is it?
I didn't realize, I realize now it's a lot of impacting for
But we're getting good at that.
And this is
Well, whether you're like urban church or like a more rural.
So, Tom, question
I
for you.
mean,
Would there be
most of the
a
city
time?
churches have the benefits of having multiple houses.
Yes, exactly.
So we're not called on a lot to do that.
Yes, yes. But, yeah, and I have a funny feeling we'll probably go into the fourth session was just wrapping things up. So we'll probably put you in.
Whenever, good to go at the time.
We'll give you a
Thank you. Well, and I wondered even with this, if that might come out.
It might, and yeah, and I think it probably will, in which case, they put a plug in and.
Yeah. By the way.
By the way, you do have, and it may actually come out exciting.
I missed that.
Because I think the workshop on June actually dovetails quite nicely. Actually, beautifully dovetails. Because one of the things they're doing now is more and more rules.
Like there's specific laws that we as licensed claimants do.
They have readers. Yeah, I know, it's sitting here. Because there's nobody in the And Sue Janet, who was priest in charge, lives in Boston. And for a graveside and some of those things, like really, it's drive 2 hours, 3 hours for a graveside? Well, that would just. That's it's complicated death, there's been a murder, God forbid, or that's a bit different.
But even there, I would say license plate is oftentimes
When you had
qualified to handle that. We are.
Oh, we're not trucks either.
We're not.
Right. And
The question comes up later, as soon as it's up front, and Joe down in the congregation.
Yeah, we got to be that in line when we do what we do. We're not here to analyze.
There were more than a few times and I thought, this is
Some questions around that.
Yes, yes, right.
I can be your spiritual guide. I can't.
It's the problem with not being a peer of this, or not understanding. Because they're different every church.
And I'll support you while you're
Yes.
you know, you will always have.
I refer as much as you can.
Yeah.
For a couple of years.
I'd love to just shrink.
For a couple of years, pressure was with us.
But I think we're getting somewhere.
Anyway, so she did it.
But I think it still comes down to communication.
It was just such a good.
But in our church,
Yes.
we don't have any.
And they weren't counselors, they were trained.
Well, we have them, but they're all trained.
Yes.
There are many.
You know, my husband's tired lately. So, and he just, he's tired of hearing the story over and over again. Trains is some of that.
Everything that's on us is like
I've been around so long that I've done everything except the emergency baptism and death.
Why would they be sharing? I know you can other boards.
But when I first at one time at the Mount and they did a minister training.
Stay in touch with
And they had it on.
Yes.
It's kind of scary.
It's still available, it's there's a requirement.
0 days.
Is that the one that's on you?
Even though it's updated.
I know,
Well, not
I know when I did mine.
No, that's right.
I took it, but then I
There
didn't
goes
have
the
a
problem.
problem. By virtue of having this.
Probably, too.
I mean, that's how they
Educational standards set for funding. Whether we agree with them, whether they're dated by virtue of having them, they need to be used. So that's correct. You know, like again, it's communication and updating them. I think is very expensive.
Like, I know we had a regional course.
Yeah, set it up.
When I became a lay minister, so the region does, we had a regional course every Sunday for 10 months.
Especially as it was trying to recover.
It was thorough. Yeah, and then of course, layman's been trained.
Yeah.
other one's on my.
I shouldn't have different trainers for something about it.
Standards, that's why you have your standard.
That someone's going to have some crazy prayer.
And you can, the thing is you can ask
To watch something.
because when you use the regional and supplement that by having a live speaker, and that was that's
Yeah.
I know when we did, we just had speakers.
yeah, but the requirement is
For one day programs.
Yep, I know every time.
That's
I've
way
never
of.
seen it, I have no idea what you're talking
We
about.
can
I've been
afford it.
involved in this a long
And I
time.
think that's one of the important.
Never mentioned that our regional.
because you have a board of standards on it.
Well, where's that?
That we can hold safe.
But you've learned by doing.
That's not.
Yes, but I.
I mean, I love it.
Because that is very significant.
But they have to teach you.
Yes.
And that is
Yeah, but if those rules exist, or those guidelines exist, if they exist, they should be mentioned in the handbook, and they are not.
Ordained person.
There's a video from somewhere or other, as a resource that works.
I would think so.
Start
with the same thing.
And then to say what
To mention the existence of those rules.
Board of standards.
what goes on there in the church, because you know.
It's all on the lay leader's site. Everything that concerns licensed lay ministers is on the site.
So who's doing the notes?
I'm suggesting, however, that the book that we were sent out ahead of time, does not mention the existence of the website or the resources.
So I think something
If we're gonna-
better.
If you're gonna say those things are important, then
That's missing.
Yeah, big time.
I mean, you know, if we're,
Yeah,
if we're
we're
out
gonna
today
do
and we don't know where.
Exactly. Yes.
Even,
And
you know, book of record needs to be,
advanced kind of stuff, so contemplative grief,
so if you're using a faulty
advanced
book
preaching,
of record,
or
garbage in, garbage in.
Well, even
They
the,
say encoding.
even the congregation fees here, because that came up.
because that's really important, especially for you in a rural area.
People
So
are
some of
asking,
those things.
what exactly is the boundaries of the, so, you know, when somebody is supposed to say, and the answer was, well, that's what we're discussing this weekend.
Well, people who may do this.
Some people are right.
Understand it needs to be more structured than it should be. You shall take the test.
We do because we do
This
it.
training,
But to the observer,
you shall not
fully pay attention.
unless you're, that sort of thing.
That came up in our meeting.
We do outline.
That's all I can say.
Like when I flip this over, I
Yeah, I mean, that would be, that's a critical anxiety point around the protocols, and the family needs to call the priest first, and if they call you first, you know, you call the priest first, and the priest is the one they assign, if it's going to be assigned to anybody else, right? And if we all think it, like a team. Yeah, and and this workshop is free, so we're not, you don't have much time.
Who's coming into our
It's, we're gonna spend a fair amount of time around.
And when we're throwing in there,
We
it's like,
obviously don't have.
no 2 days.
They have it.
We always see that.
So how do you make
Friends
sure?
every time.
How do you make sure, and how do you kind of put some guardrails in, right? And then the other is the service, because I think people can be anxious about preaching on a Sunday. Funeral service is another. So some basics, we're going to provide a sample sermon, kind of simple, just, you know, there's some guidelines on how long it should be, there's a couple of good scripture verses. You can put some stories in there, like we're gonna just kind of give some nuts and bolts so people can kind of think about it. It's not, you know, and it doesn't mean my concern is that there is like less than my sometimes. And we haven't trained with the proper practices.
First is the bishop and then it's the rector. Top to bottom.
Serving our
You would imagine knowing
or driving or whatever to another community, and to ask where you can has your rector contacted, you know, most of our lay people know the people in the neighborhood. They don't know the stranger who's driving in from the house, right?
In Victor County, we have at least one clergy, ex-United, ex-Presbyterian, ex-Methodist.
I'm glad that my,
Basically, that's funeral.
rejecting thing, I had Kathy.
I had Josh.
It's an effort. And I suspect he brings up.
Okay.
Even if it was his funerals, it does a good job.
My question. And often that's what it's not registered, it's licensed, recognized. I know a guy. I just worry that somehow we're broken and if we keep saying things that I believe is going to be pregnant, well then we just don't have a priest. And
Like a
seen this went to the payroll office and did a breakdown of all the retirement age.
Getting information from him is good.
He's fabulous. In 10 years, 23 of 51 villages will be retired, if not before. I mean, I'm regular and I can retire in January. So all those folks can retire anytime. And then we have these, and It's not getting
Yes, and we're not having a very.
So, you know, we recognize that that's just a reality. And I think it people
Right now, in St. James, we have a new record.
they already know that they can't want to grant. We take some I mean, it's not the answer everywhere, but I think it's, I think God is calling
Let's delay
to a greater
the have a
ministry.
slight
That's the other thing. Lawrence went through all the process to see what they were for, and, you know, he had a student coming in the summer to look at kind of where scriptures around what you can use it for. Hardly, I don't think there's one for labor. I think it's all clergy to like, what are we valuing?
Yeah. And I can kind of see that. And, clergy training is really important. How do you go to get further education? The salaries are fixed. You need financial support. I attended online the funeral of the wife of one of my cousins in Wales. And the funerals that they had a person on staff to do the funeral. It was a secular funeral. But it was a really good funeral. It was, the family, was front and center. It was, I was very sort of skeptical.
Was it a Christian?
It was totally secular.
Really?
And Holy Mary, that's what she was wanting. But, I was still,
What was it good about it?
it was very family-centric. Apparently this person had been over with her.
All these people.
So she had the background. But, her daughter, she said, she spent an awful lot of time.
I don't even. No, it's so. Yeah.
I don't know if she did anything after the funeral, but I feel that's what was lacking. In my last diocese, from what I've seen, it's still this fall. Go home and that's it.
Well, and somewhere like the Colleries where Dorothy Miller just was. I mean, Vernon, I mean, he did a grief show for a while. I thought, somehow Anthony comes to
No, there is not.
there's no, like, how do you catch on, right?
Well, right now we're going through a scheme of funerals. Joanne is doing, all at once, when Lee is away, Joanne's doing it.
And it's not
Boy.
it's a territory that clergy is very.
Yeah.
And rightly as well. That's our-
Well, and that's what we're having a funeral director, there's somebody else to pick it up.
Yeah, well, that's my fear.
That's a good point. That's a real good point.
And, I could see that happening in this and that whole picture. There's nobody there to do it. The funeral home would suggest.
I don't even know if there's other churches downtown.
There's a Catholic with her. I don't know if there's anybody there.
Right, and it is in.
Wow. Yeah, Eastern Shore. And it's one of the, I think it's one of our mission opportunities. I just say that as a marketing kind of way.
But it is.
But we often get called upon, and we do them well. Like, we do funerals well. I mean, they're not these 4-hour things and, karaoke, everybody comes to the microphone and shares some awful drinking story. I mean, it's orderly, it's holy, it involves the family, the person. I mean, we do these. So I think it's, and people are like, wow, this meant so much to us. Yeah, his little church, little churches.
Part of this is my memory.
Fishing community. They had readers at the door, they had a full choir, it didn't matter if it was a stranger or someone in the neighborhood. They said funerals are important, and whoever it is, we had either people greeting the family at the cemetery, helping them with their cars, setting up chairs. If it snowed, they'd even shovel around the cemeteries and people would understand the snow. And that wasn't me, that had nothing to do with me, right? They just said, we are gonna love the people that come to funerals, we do them well, and we're gonna be here. Wow.
I was very surprised when I moved here, and I became a lawyer. And first funeral, I went simply because I was a lawyer and I felt it was one of my duties. Because that was one of my duties.
Right, yes.
And yeah, you're representing the congregation, and you greet them at the door.
Yes.
But no, that's fine. Different traditions.
Yeah. Well, and again, I don't think it's a huge leap for us. I mean, I know we can't maybe do all the big receptions like some of our congregations do.
Well, we can't do
We could
that.
still put the coffee pot on, and then they could arrange for, some ladders or sodas, So we can still put the coffee pot on and welcome people. I mean, that's not a huge leap for us. And for some churches it might be, they just don't have people who can stand up and feed and stuff. But there are ways, and we do music well. We have choirs, and we have music, and you are a musician. There are things that we have that are gifts that you don't get at the Lions Club or something if you have a funeral.
I know last community, funerals that were in the community were always, it didn't matter which church, because all the churches were quite small. They were all held in the community hall, all of them. And it didn't matter what denomination, and the whole town went.
Right.
Including the teachers.
So that's something. Well, my dad, that was the way he approached me. He went to everybody's funeral, and it wasn't in our church. He just felt that that's what he was. Respect the family, respect the die, and often they were involved in volunteer work. And that was a really important thing to go to funerals.
Being a regional representative.
Well, I had
When the diocese actually
chosen a
and I
hall,
look at who shows
didn't
up,
have any equipment.
it's the people that are, and all the rest don't
If you went to a church, this is what they set up, like they wanted to live stream, somebody had to bring all the gear. It's like, just about every church has some ability to do something along that line, right? Because it's COVID, we are living like it, right? The musician didn't show up, and or even the funeral home, between the directors, that stuff is ironed out. We had more out our way. It's not in urban, this is rural areas of folks who are directors, so no funerals, just picking out the names that they're going to talk. And so when they come to the church, there's no directors, right? So you have to, now if you want a guest book, you'll have to pick that up, because we don't supply guest books, right? Like, if you need an urn, you could go buy one for a funeral home, but you don't have to. So like, we were doing all the stuff. We would talk about the obits now. The Prodigal Herald's deadline is, if you want it in tomorrow, you've got to get there. Like, I'm not doing your obit, right? But, so we were doing the question, asking all the questions. So the funeral director would be, and I was like, we're a church, but that has become, because they don't want to pay the price. Some of them can't afford, with the, what is it, $2,800 or $2,500 that comes from the pension. or whatever when you die, and that's what they had to pay for cremation. And the gravesides too, people got, or even we had folks that said, oh, we have to do gravestones, they can't remember. Hiring a musician and all those things.
But if it's still delegation,
So money is an issue.
Well, that's why we some priests want
The green fairies do the other.
yeah, exactly. But that's to the detriment
themselves, exactly.
I was surprised.
detriment to the
She was pretty happy.
So it's a barrier, that's.
There's, I don't know if it's gonna be large.
because they're holding back.
I'm gonna go because I really just myself, but I'm getting questions. I know how to say it. Do you need a special cemetery? I mean, I think Brianne Andrews in French Village, they were looking at a special cemetery.
That was one of the first things I read. One of the legal things about the
Was it still 6 weeks or is it deeper, right? You know, do they have to have a box or can you just drop it? What if they don't want to use a brush? Can you put something on the back of their truck? I mean, really, how do you transport a body? But maybe that's fine.
My first teaching job, teacher, you carry.
At least David's quieter.
Teacher, you carry.
I was gonna try, I was afraid to say
And
this.
I could not believe that.
Yeah.
Friends there, which was Carolina, it's hard crash here for a reason. But they lost the body.
I mean, just looking at this education training.
Because any death in road
Supervised practical training.
had to go to, well, that part of the strategy, had to go to,
I know
for a knock box. And they had to fly down to Winnipeg, because we were right on the border of Vancouver. But they lost.
just kind of got thrown into it.
Their child.
I know.
So we're all gathered
Yeah,
for
no one said,
the
you know,
when the priest is there, the Catholic
I mean, it's also clear that they have to work together. I mean,
there's no thought, you know, this is a pretty isolated place. And finally, the priest said, well,
Like, I just lean
it doesn't look like that.
part of who I am.
So we adjourned to the next day, and it did show up, but I got to carry, there was no way to drive to the gravesite, we had to cross the suspension bridge and walk through
And I will help, I will walk.
a burnt down residential school that had been burnt down years ago. And there's nobody from that community, the native community, would go into the graveyard. And apparently there were some bodies in there.
other than getting.
I mean, I disagree with this way, but, you know, historically, they were not going in there. And then we tried to go the casket in the grave. It was too small, so the two teachers let the girl get into the hole. Beyond belief, absolutely. But we did it, you know. Poor family, it was just, you know, they were young, a young family, really nice. You know, and you have to go through the bleeding of the body, then the whole rigmarole burial.
Communication, but it's not just, it is us.
Well, and this is one of the things that we recognize in funerals. That's pretty important. You can have a bad morning prayer, you know what I mean, or a bad sermon, but a funeral,
If it's bad, it's remembered.
yeah, you don't need to be perfect.
Yeah.
The way it was handled before.
And it was, I always thought, this is their last memory of their loved one, the last time they see them. You know, I want it to be decent, honorable, holy, and, you know, that they feel comforted and supported.
Happy to converse.
Sometimes that's not possible. Okay.
church,
Yeah.
but.
I didn't bring mine.
But that's all right, but they're just gonna change.
On purpose.
Yeah. Anyway,
Not that I'm giving out my orders or anything, I just think, why am I wearing my collar?
But anyway, yeah, so, anyway, that's what it should be, if you're wondering why we're all wearing.
all sorts of things. You want some white paper? You want to hold up some white paper?
I wear black.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah, so I mean, we know there's a bit of anxiety around it too, in terms of people saying, well, you know, I might be able to do morning.
You need to
There's a lot of pressure, and I think, well, even if you did it as a team, there were 2 or 3 ladies, maybe you start out and you have a priest shadowing, right? And just kind of helping you, or coaching you through and that kind of thing, like you don't have to
wrap up in
jump in the
about
big deep side of the pool. Would you do for your thing?
If I was asked, yeah.
You could do it, no problem.
I see that, but I mean,
Okay, so you're working.
I'm just going a little bit, I'm just going a
You
little
know
bit.
what, I think you probably,
I'm going ground level,
Yeah.
I'm saying, you know, there should be, if we're saying these are important,
Yeah.
and I can go 20 years without having ever, anyone even speak to me about this. There should be something in the licensing agreement that says,
Okay, yeah, if you show me where.
every 2 or 3 years, you shall.
See.
Do a renewal workshop on one or 2 of these skills.
Yeah.
But what that should be for
look at this conference.
the bishop should know.
I think some of this is gonna be around.
Once you do that, you have to identify the resources.
Oh, absolutely.
Just saying around Canada.
Seriously, yeah.
Having some options, and then we talked about that.
We don't operate, we have recorded, we cannot function in our parish, thankfully.
I mean, you succinctly said it there about, you know, there's some of the realities.
But if in fact the license
Memberships
is,
and free for all
if our license
It's just a reality, there's no use complaining or.
This way.
So that means we need to shake ourselves differently, because it's still really important that we're placing.
And if it's
Yes,
related.
I don't want us closing up and moving out.
well,
If we can't, you know, sometimes we still have to,
well, I still feel quite strongly that we have too many buildings in too close an area. They're not controlled, with conversions as well. So you have too many churches too close. How do the existing bishop's office structure? Impossible to do that. Well, we've got James, which they're far enough away and they're all physical location. They need to stay. But Christ Church, St. Bede's and St. George's will be served by one church. Well, and you'd think that if a new minister comes in,
Which church and
and that's where the fight
that.
and that all is going to consider asking for their license.
And we're defined by our history, by our geography.
Yeah. Have I done anything in the last 4 years to maintain my skill set?
I have examples and I've done.
Especially if they're letting her go to other parishes.
Just one now, divided by a river, the river.
What's that?
That was the wrong thing.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
If somebody wants to be a lady.
yes. The other is, if you go to one of those churches, then somebody wins, even if you don't use that language.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
If you can go to an alternative space that's not one of those 3 churches, and I don't know what that would be, it could be, you know, another church or another space or whatever.
Waiting for your
Then there's no
turn.
winners and losers. Well, my chair is not St. James or Christ Church or St. Bede's, it's St. Helens or St. Swithin's. It's not easy, but sometimes that helps with, well, this is our church, and, you know, we're gonna use our talents today, thank you very much.
I know in Worcester there are 3 congregations.
So what about, I think the situation was that the Western Mass is a new rector comes in, and we have a, like, saying this, who has died in
You lose your license until the bishop renews. Evaluation is the way to go. It's on for about 5 years before
How many licensed lay
the
ministers?
bishop made a decision. And said, yep, if you're going to, one church, find a church. But over that for a couple of years, he ended up changing the name of the village church and doing that. And of course, they're also, not just, well, from each of the churches, but St. John's people didn't outright reach it to all of them.
group up. And Jesus looks down, shakes his head. All that time my little home church in All Saints Mill Village in South Hawkins. I mean, it was deconsecrated in the 80s. It was moved to the valley in South Gallery. You know, we got pictures and that kind of thing. It has wonderful memories. I mean, my grandparents were married there, and but here I am. I'm part of the church, right? I didn't leave.
Parishes are correct. I know our parish. I know our
No? You do it all. Oh, very nice to add anything to it if I can. You're waiting for your chairs, aren't you?
I am. No, my chair's over there.
Still waiting to hear back. Lisa.
Somebody committee that put together, no one, King it was a book. It was wonderful, but there was only one copy per person. And of course it disappeared.
Yeah, and I went to the parish.
I keep losing my chair. I'll sit under the table.
This chair, my dear. Here, you can have this chair, and I'll just slide in here.
It really was a wonderful.
Thank you for sharing this. I think it's pretty good taking it out there.
Yes. Who made it like a two-sided office? People that they had in their case wasn't just one office. Yeah, wow.
I don't know where. The Lord be with you.
And also,
We're just sitting there.
Get everybody back together here, and then what we'll do is we'll do the presentation, kind of review of the material, just present, and then afterwards we'll move directly into the panel session. We'll do the panel session until about 2:45. Kathy Farrell has to head off at 3 o'clock. In which case, then everyone's going to go back to their rooms, get into your lay readers' robes, or lay minister's robes, and we'll come back out for our group photo. And it's going to be outside, and it's going to be around the front gate, front entrance.
yes, okay.
All right, and then that way we can have Kathy with us. And plus we'll have a bit of time for the panel with Kathy.
I'm not sure. Is that your?
That's fine. All right. Anyway, we'll go with group 5 first. We'll go reverse. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
That must be Maxine.
No, it's Ethel. Come on, Ethel.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear her back there?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, on the first one, the duties of the licensed lay minister, most of us had training in all those things, with the exception of number 4, in the case of emergency, the baptism, or funerals, because it's not just doing the funeral service, it's the preparation 2 or 3 days before, counseling with the loved ones, And we have not had training in that, except 1 or 2 people have taken one course that has been offered, and there's another one coming up. But I certainly would not do it without training, because that's a very sensitive time. It's a make or break sometimes for families. For the discussion group question, pretty well all of us have had training in recognizing our gifts or somebody pointing them out to us. And so we know what our skills are and we're doing them. I don't think there are any that hadn't been performed by at least one of us. 1 to 3 of us had performed all of them. The second one, expectation that everyone fulfills the same duties. No, but mostly everybody does fulfill the same duties, whether the expectation is there or not, because the opportunity is there and the occasion is there, and so we do it. And we have a duty roster, so that's built in. In a couple of cases, people are there called on Thursday to do it on Sunday, but we have a roster for 3 months. And then, if you can't do it, you have to get somebody else. You don't have the person in the roster get somebody, you get it yourself. You have to be responsible. Anything that could be added, that's mainly tailored to the parish. Some do more, some do less. Anything that we're not doing, more training online, because people can't always travel to where the training's offered. Could be offered in one region and not in another. When somebody from another region wants it, if it's online, everybody would have access to it. Now we say everybody, but not everybody who doesn't have computers. Or sometimes or internet. Or signal. Right. Okay. We also said one thing that we're not doing, that perhaps we should be doing, or should be doing, is if we have a full-time or even a part-time, where we have Eucharist every week, we could release our priest and the lay, I never get used to that. Licensed lay minister, LLM, one day I say LLMs would do morning prayer in our parish, and the priest would be free to go to a parish that doesn't have a priest, and then they would get a Eucharist. So we would be willing to go to another parish, but they would only be for morning prayer, not only. Morning prayer is a very meaningful service when it's well done, especially if the parts are sung. For all of us, it's sung. It's really good. So that's something that everybody in our group said they would be willing to do that, to give up one of our Eucharists, perhaps so another parish could have it. The other, the instructions, yes, and we all took instructions various ways, but all those were covered. And the candidates, we all have had our skills honed by practice mostly, and people making comments, positive or negative, helps us. So that's very good. The more training we thought, though, would be pastoral care, death and dying, family visitation, prayers, and funeral prep. The phone ministry, which is good for people who are shut in or want special prayers. That's a good thing. And very few of us had participation in baptism preparation, because usually the priest does it. But that's something that if you have a part-time priest, maybe could be taken off their shoulders, and we could do it. Several of us have helped with confirmation preparation, but I have never personally sought them out. I've helped once it's set up, but not sought them out, because we don't always have the parish list with the phone numbers or know who has chosen, etc. And I think that was it. Anything else that I missed?
Oh, good job, Ethel.
Okay.
Or you get to take it.
Where's Jordan?
I'm coming.
She's looking for you.
I know.
Where's Jordan go?
He's right
Hi.
Oh, okay.
You can't hide.
No. good ones.
Yeah, you were gonna do the duties and training stuff?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can hear me when I try to project my voice.
Yeah.
Great. So, we decided together that we would kind of take the discussion group questions and start from the bottom up, you know, like launching a rocket at Cape Canaveral, to say 4, 3, 2, 1, take lift off. So we're going to do that. So we said, why don't we start with, is there anything we're not doing that perhaps we should be doing? And one of the big takeaways, and I think Barb can add in if she wants, was that there are a lot of parishes that sometimes aren't able to get candidates for consideration for rectors of parishes or so on and so forth, especially if they're full-time or even half-time. It's even more acute in very rural parishes. And as you get to a smaller and smaller environment or community, that seems to be more of an issue. Anecdotally, in my experience moving from Kent-Wolfville to Halifax, is Kent-Wolfville are kind of great because they're like rural but in a town. But I've seen that the parishes in HRM, sometimes Halifax and Chebucto and Dartmouth region seem to sometimes get people faster in some ways. I don't know if that's true or not. No? Not your experience? Okay. I guess I'm just seeing a fluke or trying to put dots together in my head. So maybe what are we doing? Well, I guess it's not a rural-urban problem then. It is something that's widespread. We should enable and engage with our laity and our licensed lay ministers in this, the last group said, leading some services and sharing with clergy in the region different responsibilities, like basically all 1 to 10 here, and possibly expanding the training as well, so that we're more equipped to do that on a semi-permanent or permanent basis in a parish, and then kind of, as they did back in the day, have the clergy kind of stuck to region or parishes within a region. I don't know. But then 3, is there anything that might be added to the list or modified in this? I don't know what.
We didn't come up with anything.
We didn't come up with anything, and I was going to say I think 1 to 10 there are pretty good compromises actually, and I mean over time, I think they've been added and stuff. So I think if we can kind of hit all 10 of these points in a training or experience, that would be great. And I know you can talk about your parish, but in my parish, it's kind of interesting in compared to other parishes I've been in, that it's kind of thought that like laity can do all the laity duties and ministers do all the ministers' duties. There's that binary, but I'm finding that there's not really, every parish is different in what they do, so it's like we all kind of do everything. We have kind of the same expectation on a Sunday morning that it works well and it flows, but there are specializations, and I'm honestly not sure how they're decided in my parish at least. It's kind of by osmosis is what I look at.
Okay, my turn?
Sorry, your turn, yeah, sorry. Oh, I thought I was doing all of them, then you were doing the last one, but that's okay. You can do number 1, discussion,
no.
and then.
Oh, no, okay, so, I don't think we talked a lot about number 1.
No, we didn't. Kind of did that for everything else, yeah.
Yeah, so, talking about the education and training side and the gaps, we focused really on the gaps there, because that was what was important. And Ted kind of summed it up in one word, youth. One of our big gaps is that we don't have anybody to kind of come along after us, right? Like we're kind of an aging group, so it's important that we find a way to bring youth in, and we talked about mentoring, and the mentoring being by current licensed lay ministers that have all the experience, that can take somebody on and mentor them and kind of, you know, follow them through and say, I'm there with you the whole way. And some follow-up would be really important. So that's what we had for that.
And I concur with the mentorship, because it's night and day when you have someone helping you understand it. And that is actually what a lot of young people are looking for, is a lot of mentorship from our elders. And we'll listen to the elders.
Thank you. Group 3.
only on the last. Our group only focused on the last four.
Microphone.
Okay.
Our group focused. Our group focused on the last questions in the thing. What we're not doing but should be doing, we said pastoral care, not limited to home communion. And we all agreed that in order to do that, we had to have pastoral care training, not counseling care. The counseling we felt would be left with the priest. How do we do pastoral care for families? Again, training. Support for youth, and keeping in mind we should be asking with what they want. Don't just say, we're gonna have a dance.
Yeah.
Because some of them are gonna go, I don't dance.
Yeah.
Support for ailing and dying parishioners and their caregivers. How can we support them? One suggestion was like just taking a meal and saying, I'll stay for half an hour. And then training for ailing, dying parishioners and caregivers. Support for grief, training in coping with grief, training in preaching. I did the online one, but sometimes just the step process would be having a little more information. Use net news as a resource. Because I know I'm guilty of saying, oh, I haven't got time to read that this week. But there are lots of things in net news and on the diocesan website. Training in dealing with those grieving or terminal illness, when to approach and when to push, when not to approach too. Training in intergenerational communication. How do you approach the different age groups? And most of all, self-care. When we can't do something, we do generally feel guilty.
Yeah.
We really shouldn't. I mean, if you're saying no all the time, maybe you would. But yeah, sometimes you have to pick and choose. And that's where we left it.
We had a lot of discussion, and I got trying to scribble, because I scribbled on here.
Got a mic there.
Mike, do I need to make? Yes, please. We had some great discussions, and I'm not sure we were with where everyone else was, but we'll take a go at it here. The instruction and the training, we had a lot of discussion about that, and what was standardized training, the instruction will include. And we talked about the information that's, some knew was online or is online, some didn't know it was online, so standardizing that. The other thing with the training is we felt that if that was a standardized training we should be using, it should be updated, acknowledging the cost of it, but it should be updated. And refreshers for those of us, all of those of us in the room, and how many said they've been laymaners 15 plus years? When was the last time you had a refresher or a training? 4 years. Duties, we talked about, the only thing that we really had about the duties was the confirmation, going back to that one. The gather and prepare candidates in group 5 mentioned it, seeking them out, and we had mentioned identifying and didn't see that as our role. So I'm not sure if that was the intent of that duty, or that it should be clarified. If not, it should be clarified. It was felt that it was definitely the priest's responsibility to identify and get, or seek them out. The other thing I had here for training too is licensed lay ministers. It was mentioned there's 400 of us. There's 40 of us here. How many of us are doing refresher training? when you take it
course over again.
Yeah. That's great. There's a few doing it. We thought that there should be a requirement for us to maintain our license, that we should be doing at least 1 or 2 courses every 2 to 3 years. And that this should be the minister, and also we talked about the ministers. When a new minister comes in and we tell them we're a licensed lay minister and we have a service and they license, they apply for a new license for us with their signature on it. But are they verifying what training we've had and when the last time was we've had it?
Yeah.
We also felt that as we are licensed under the bishop, it should be recorded and tracked in the bishop's office.
Well, Jane's on vacation right now.
I raised my eyebrows at the same time.
It's easy to create a database, if you have that information, plug into it.
Yeah, that's true. And that was the response to that question. It should, with technology, it should be able to track. And the training, so that was the training. Gaps, we identified some gaps. Gaps in communication between us, the priests, and the diocese. Like how much communication is going back and forth. How much communication from this weekend will go back to our ministers and will go back to the diocese. Another gap, ordained ministry. Are they open to working with the LLMs and exercising our duties? Another gap, teen ministry. These ordained priests coming out of AST, are they taught teamwork? Are they taught,
I asked the same question, I'm sorry.
It said we had another bishop's husband in our group.
Sorry, Sandra.
Also teen ministry. Yeah, are the priests coming out of AST, are they being taught teen ministry? How to go into a parish and work with your lay ministers or your servers or your ladies guilds or whatever groups that are in there. Are they comfortable coming into our parishes knowing how to be a leader in a team environment?
Yeah.
I talked about the duties, talked about the training, talked about the gaps. That was it.
Very good.
The first very last, okay, number 1.
Good job. So right on.
No. This is my bribery, I have chocolate, anybody? No, seriously, I don't, this has been given to me, and I'm handing it off to whoever would like some chocolate, so. There it is.
You're trying to buy our favor again, aren't you?
Absolutely. And I know you can hear me.
No.
Oh, stop.
Don't listen to him.
I never have listened to him, so. I'm
gonna start now.
No. So Dale, once again, has done this wonderful, confusing. Actually, it covers a lot of what people have already said, so I don't need to say it again. And basically, we didn't look at a lot of this stuff, we just looked at those 2 last questions on each page. What are we not doing and where are the gaps, which is basically the same questions. So we looked at, as I say, a lot of what people have already said. And yeah, so it's updated training. And one of the things that we talked about in the training is that lived experience. Because it's one thing, not all priests, not all licensed lay ministers are teachers. And so if you have somebody who's had a lived experience, no matter where they are in the continuum, to have them be part of that training. And I know they did when they did the videos, they brought people in who had expertise in different things. But I mean, there may be people not necessarily in your, like, we have somebody coming in to talk to us about accessibility, and she's a professor at the university. So, I mean, it doesn't have to be somebody within
our church community. It can be somebody out there who can, you can bring in and have them share that lived experience of what you're wanting, as far as the different workshops and the different aspects of what our responsibilities are. Just looking at some of these one of the things that we talk about, and I know the bishop doesn't want to see this, I'm just gonna hide this one. No, we're not. I think this is an ongoing discussion. I think it's probably an ongoing discussion in many parts of the Anglican Church around Eucharistic practices. And I know that when you don't have a priest in your parish, if you have a priest in charge, or a lot of the licensed lay ministers, or somebody's coming in once in a while, and we talk, everybody's shared about this. So obviously it's something that's really there, that's a big concern, a big gap that's coming out. And even when we had, I know we talk about Deacon's Eucharist, and just, I don't know, I'm sure there's wonderful reasoning around this, but in my brain, and in a lot of people in our group, it's like, I can take, or the deacon can take, the consecrated Eucharist out to, somebody in a nursing home or somebody in their home that isn't able to be at the church, and offer them the Eucharist, where we can't do that as part of a service, as part of a service within our people that are gathered. And so I think it's one of those places of ongoing discussion. And so anyway, it's just, and how we care for the people that are there in our community. And not just in our church building, but in our community. One of the things that you talked about, Tom, and I'm actually adding this to a gap, because it just popped into my head. We have, you talked about parishioners being everybody within our parish.
Yes.
And I like, that just really hit me, it was the one sentence that's really hit me, like, everybody in our parish, like literally, all the students that live around my church. And we offered at St. Paul's, we offered a safe space for students to come and study. Our church hall's not being used in the weekdays. So they had a place they could come, they could get a snack, they could study, there was Wi-Fi, and they knew it was a safe place for them to come to. We just opened it up to the students to do that. And the word spread. And there was actually 3 students who, when they were there, went up into the church and prayed.
Yep.
I don't know, maybe we did see them again. Who knows where they went off with that? But they knew that that was a place that was welcoming to them, that was safe. So how do we create, and you talk about young people coming into your church, how do we create a safe place for people to come? The other places that, like reaching out as far as licensed lay ministers, and I'm not involved, I was involved with the students, I'm not so much involved with this program, but people who have had people in their family or friends who have taken their life by suicide. It is big right now. Mental health is big right now, huge. And there was no support group for that particular group of people. So we now have an ongoing support group that meets at our church who can support each other. And we have people who we were able to reach out to who have expertise in doing that, in that type of counseling. Because we're not trained in, we can't be trained in everything. So we've got to bring in those resources. But like where's and I know, Lisa, you talked about the neighborhood. Like we did neighborhood walks, and one time we went out and we prayed for all of the different people, that weekend. It was a mental, somebody had just taken their life by suicide in town. So we prayed for all the people who were involved in that person's life. But like if you want young people to come, you have to create a safe place. They have to know that that's a place that they can come to and feel welcomed, and just that there's no expectation around. We're not expecting you to show up every Sunday we just care about you, and we're constantly reaching out to the people, the students who live, they drive us crazy sometimes too. But we love ringing our bell at 11 o'clock in the morning, you know, on Sunday morning, you know, but, yeah. But anyway, so, you know, you talk about what the role of a licensed lay minister is. Well, it's even beyond what you got there. You can be totally creative around everything you're doing.
Self-care.
Self-care. I think we're really, really bad at self-care. I was telling him I just created, my husband said, and my spiritual director said, you've got to create a list of all the things you do in the church. And I wrote down all the things I do in the church, and I had two pages. And my husband said, see, I told you were doing too much in the church. Anyway, but I mean, he's the guy I call on when I have to get the physical stuff done, you know, like the unscrewed or whatever, and, yeah. But when you're able to name that, and I think we don't do a really good job as people anywhere, whether it's licensed lay ministers, or whether it's wives, or husbands, or partners, or
Work.
in our work, or, you know, wherever it is. We don't do a really good job of saying, I need help here. I really do. And we're very bad at saying, no, that's okay, I can do it, I can do it, you know, and you rescue people constantly. And they don't necessarily want to be rescued, but, you know, we do it anyway. So I think self-care, and I think there's something in there, and I don't know whether it's a program around self-care, or just having a way to, you know, and I mean, I think we have to do self-care for our priests too, because they take on a lot of stuff, and we don't always, we're not always conscious of how they're doing too. And so I think self-care for a lot of people is not something that we do really well. And I think it's something that's critically important. Otherwise, we're gonna burn out. We're gonna burn out. People who are carrying, licensed lay ministers who are carrying a parish for 2 or 3 years, they're gonna burn out. There's no question in my mind. And, you know, so like, how do we really care for each other? Am I missing anything, or I'm real chatty, I'm real.
I guess it was already touched on.
Yeah, the continuing upgrading, yeah, it's like getting a driver's license, and you get bad habits after a while.
Yes, and she has bad habits.
I have bad habits. Deborah has none. The 2 hearts, yeah. It's a heart-to-heart thing, yeah.
It's really the licensed lay ministers and the directors and priests.
Yeah,
And clergy.
yeah,
So keep that going.
yeah.
All right.
I'm done. It would be chocolate, right? Yeah.
That's all been,
So don't go to winning list ceremonies. Because they can get really good.
this time we'll move into our panel.
I just want to ask a question. And it may be, and my apologies if it's a stupid question. I know there are no stupid questions. But in our discussions, we talked about licensed lay ministers and this and that and the other thing. And as a licensed lay minister, and I have been for 13 years, I haven't done a funeral, and I haven't had to baptize anybody. But I'm right in thinking that I am a Eucharistic minister, am I not?
Some are.
In your parish you are, yes.
Well, that's what I mean. In my parish, am I not a Eucharistic minister? Because I serve on, that's what a Eucharistic minister does, right? So, and that's what I mean, people saying a Eucharistic license,
The Eucharistic license.
If you're only a Eucharistic minister, if you're
That's a separate license than the one that you administer
at the table. Okay, so there's not like varying degrees of licenses. When I say that I'm a Eucharistic minister, a licensed one,
Right.
that doesn't necessarily mean I'm qualified to do things outside of the parish walls. Is that what I'm understanding now?
It's not about being qualified, you're not licensed to. that's
Okay.
all. Yeah.
Okay.
But somebody can be a Eucharistic minister without being a licensed lay minister.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the distinction too. Yeah.
And so are we realizing that if we're talking about, training people in the going into a home and into, that there's a special licensing process for that? Because, like I'm in a parish without anybody in charge of it right now. So I just want to make sure that I don't do anything that I shouldn't be doing.
The request for the license should come from your parish priest.
I don't have a priest in charge and I don't have a minister. I have two parish wardens.
Isn't it the Archdeacon?
Okay, so.
No, you should have known that.
Thank you very much.
To be renewed.
And it wasn't just a
When there's no.
And I'll ask our panel.
My license is special test.
I know different parishes have different licenses, but technically your license, you're already.
And then the license is your But as I said, I know the candidates here because I've been here too.
He used to say a lot of yes to stuff.
Yeah, I know.
Which is good, I always said to Ron, you need to say yes more. Sometimes you say yes to stuff too much.
That's like a problem that could be fixed.
That's what, it's gonna muddy the water.
That'd be difficult if we had an experience.
Ultimately, it's the bishop's decision to take the lead. She gets to say what licenses are everywhere, but I have one. Do you guys have any?
No, we're not ready yet. I have them from the last time. We're trying to get through something.
And then, are there any of those nitty-gritty questions that want to come this way?
Well, we have to.
These are the nitty-gritty.
Yes.
Nitty-gritty?
I got nitty-gritty. Anybody need nitty-gritty? Nitty-gritties for you?
Free.
Thank you. Nitty-gritties. Yeah, you can have the whole thing. So
I'm loading them on me, huh? Okay.
But anyway, this is our opportunity to meet the folks. As I say, what we'll do is we'll meet as a panel for about 15 minutes or so. We'll have happy to. Then we'll go out, we'll get our picture taken, then we'll come back at 3 o'clock and we'll resume this again, and we'll move on to hopefully before. So, hopefully we'll have lots of conversation, and I think we will. Yes, he will, yeah. And the invited guests and myself don't have to necessarily get rolled, but the rest of you, if you have your alms, by all means, wear them. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves and say what they do.
No toilet paper?
No toilet
I'm Kathy Farrell, and I'm filling in the vocations coordinator's position, interim.
Lisa Vaughn, Parish Vitality Coordinator.
Sandra Pike, and I'm the bishop. I'm Heather McCants, I'm the president of AST.
I am Douglas Beck, and I serve on the Discernment and Formation Committee here. And I am also one of the three working with the newly ordained group currently, just starting their second year. In the Diocese of Maine, I'm the co-chair of the Clergy Formation Committee too, which sort of folds into our conversation today.
I'm Tom Henderson, and for those of you who don't know, I'm warden. So, anyway, and what I'll do is, this is just kind of a free form, so if someone wants to speak. If you want to ask a question, you'll ask a question. I gave some nitty-gritty questions, and that's just kind of a framework around which we can have some of this discussion. It's not a complete list, and we have some questions that arose from this morning. I think there's some areas that were kind of more in-depth than others, and we'll just kind of bring it to this group and we'll see where it goes. Okay?
Can I just make one comment, because that beginning point, that first sentence, just to say, I want to clarify about groping around blindly. I don't think I said that.
No. I was paraphrasing.
I know. But I think it's important to say that my point about that really is that we can see how things fit together even when we don't have the whole. And so my point about not having the picture is you have to look more closely at each piece to see if it fits with the next one. Some of you remember this, I know, but it's important because I do think there are themes emerging from this weekend. There are things we already knew were starting to take shape in some way, that out of need, out of capacity, out of people coming forward with gifts in particular areas. So it feels like things are taking shape in a way. It doesn't mean we're just trying to fit anything together that might fit. We're being very intentional about making sure that things fit. But we don't know necessarily where it's all going yet. But that doesn't mean we don't know anything, or that things don't fit well and that it's not appropriate. So I just want to make sure that, because I don't think we're in that degree of uncertainty. It's just, we're in the middle of a time of huge transformation. Oh, I'm just going to practice.
I'll start. Under authority, the fourth question down. Currently licensed lay ministers are licensed to the parish. Could certain future lay ministers, and I guess that would be one question, the certain, be licensed instead to the diocese, the region, or the archdeaconry, or to more than one parish? And how, and that, the last one, how do we maintain the lines of accountability? Like when we raise some of the questions and concerns from that last part, from this last discussion, considering the training, the gaps, the lack of communication, has thought already gone into this possibility?
Yes, I can certainly, the people could fill in, because Tom might have some things particularly, anyone who's been in the diocese longer than I didn't train here. I trained in Newfoundland and came to this, I'm from Nova Scotia, but trained elsewhere. So there was a history of diocesan lay readers, I understand, from the archdeacons and regional deans, so that did exist. And in preparation for being here today, I did have conversations, because I was meeting last week with both the archdeacon separately and then the regional dean separately on Zoom. And so I asked them what their questions were, what any concerns or things they thought should come up. And this came up there too, like that, is there a way, because we recognize that some parishes have no licensed lay ministers, or maybe they have some who do parts of that role, don't feel comfortable preaching, maybe haven't led a service, but have done pieces and do them well. Like we said, it was already noted that not everyone does all of the same things. So if you have a parish with a surplus of licensed lay ministers, and some do, is there a way, just like you share clergy, maybe you share your licensed lay ministers? So how would that happen? It can happen now without there being regional or diocesan licensed lay ministers, but that's not to say there couldn't be a different way. And I think there would have to be a different kind of record keeping of that in some way. We would be then looking at what are the needs regionally, what skill sets or gifting are we looking for, who are the people who have that, who are interested, what kind of geographic area might they be willing to cover, and would then we be looking at compensation for those like mileage, and do they get paid? So we just want to make sure we're clear so that we know what we're asking of somebody, and they know what to expect. But I think there's a possibility of this, and then I think they could, what I would see, and this is just throwing it out there, is that possibly you could be a licensed lay minister in your parish. I don't know if it would be and a regional licensed lay minister or only a regional one. So I think that's what we have to figure out about that accountability piece, Janet, that's there. So if you're a regional licensed lay minister in your parish, your rector's expecting you to be available for this, and you've made a commitment elsewhere, like how do we avoid those kinds of things happening? So I think those are the kinds of things we can work out. I think all of that is, we can work that out. I just think we have to name it up front and just kind of wrestle with it and figure out what's the best way to do that. But I know that there are people who are already doing this, who've been asked. When I was in Shelburne, I had one licensed lay minister. We had people from Liverpool who would come down. We had permission from the rector to ask them. So people have been doing this for a long time. Parishes have been doing it, and I know what you're asking is how might we sort of formalize it, or do we need to, is it time? And it might be time to revisit. I would think it would be better happening on a regional level than a diocesan level, just because I think the accountability is just too I don't know who you'd be accountable to on a diocesan level. And then regionally, there would have to be some way of, again, what's the accountability, and how's the communication shared, and yeah, I think all of it is worth pursuing. And again, I think there would be some, at least, either you would only be a regional and be available to all, or you'd be both, and some licensing minister would only be in their parish, because that's all they're going to be looking for, and that's all they'll feel comfortable with, or they can't drive long distances or whatever. So I think there may have to be some kind of both and, that would be another thing. And then it would be is there extra training required of those regional folks? Because there may be different practices in those parishes that won't be familiar. So we just need to make sure we're not setting somebody up to have a difficult experience. Claire, did you have a?
Yeah, I'm just
wondering. Did you want to follow on that?
One of the things I've been encouraging, maybe stepping out of line, but encouraging, is parishes talk about their ministry within the parish, is at a regional level. If regions were to write proposals about how they could see it working in their region, and then if the diocese collected these proposals, because no one proposal does it all, but if there's some common threads, and if there's some things that one parish hasn't thought about, or one region hasn't thought about, but another one has, then that can kind of guide the diocese as the diocese moves forward into this, so that there can be some continuity, some consistency, some coherence to accountability, deployment, communication, all of those things that are so vitally important. So it's just planting that seed, write a proposal and see what comes of it at regional council.
Claire, I think Claire.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's a timeline for this. Like, things get talked about all the time, but nothing seems to get done. So I'm just wondering if there's, like, if that's going to be a goal, then is there a timeline, and can we see where there's going to be this progress?
I think we'd have to know it would be nice to know what the will of this group is, and if this is something that emerges out of this weekend, then how do we put that in place? Like I said, it already came up with regional deans and archdeacons. Someone has to kind of give it some shape, that's the thing, and that person wouldn't be me. I mean, I can approve it, I can give input into it, but that's often the challenge is who takes that on, to kind of shape this and get the input we need to clarify, is it both and, that you're a licensed administrator in the parish and a regional, and then what's the other training needed, and so I think there are pieces to it, and those are the pieces we have to figure out, and identify those things so that we can move forward. So I don't know what to suggest in terms of a time frame. I think we could be working towards it while we're creating, while we're doing it, we could start to work towards it simply by trying to share resources of licensed administrators with one parish to another, and then asking regional deans to bring that to Clericus, for instance, to say, we're exploring this and we're asking, we're letting parishes know that this is a desire that some licensed administrators have, and we think it's a good thing, and we're gonna encourage it, like that. And so how do we work towards that? So I still don't, I can't give you a timeline for that, but I don't think it's, right now, some of that can happen without a firm, like without it being figured out. We can start to work.
David first, and then Louise.
I'd like to clarification on the licensed lay minister. I know I have my licensed lay minister's license, but the Eucharistic minister, are you people saying it's a different sign feature for them?
No, what Tom was saying was that if
Yeah, I
you're in
didn't
your...
get it clearly, so that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, if you're taking it outside of your parish to shut-ins, you'll have to have a separate license from that. If you're administering at your own parish within the communion setting, that's okay. You're okay. But if you're taking it to the nursing home, or if you're taking it to shut-ins, then that's a separate license. And you don't necessarily have to be a licensed lay minister to do that. That's a separate license.
Okay. So if I go to the nursing home in Dartmouth, say if I went down to the Virgin, I'm supposed to have a Eucharistic.
Yeah, Eucharistic ministry to shut-ins, yeah, there's a separate
Okay,
license.
good enough, thank you.
Now, if you're somebody who's doing, just clarify, because if you happen to go to another parish as a licensed lay minister, for instance, for some reason, and you happen to be asked to administer communion if there's a priest present, your license to administer at the altar extends to another place that way.
Yes.
It's just if you're taking it from your church, just to be clear. Yeah, from the church, it is. It's when you're taking it from the church. It might be obvious.
I have one more.
Follow.
From Bishop Ron told most of us that we could proclaim the gospel in church. I know that's not done in every church, but it's okay for a licensed lay minister to proclaim the gospel.
Are you talking about Sunday worship when clergy are present, or just in general, or what?
Sunday worship in the parish over here.
Oh, in morning prayer worship, but my understanding is that that's been different from parish to parish.
Okay.
So it's not something that I think is standard across the diocese, so that's a conversation I think people can have. I personally have no difficulty with lay people proclaiming the gospel. I think when there's a deacon present, when I was in a parish with a the deacon always did it unless the deacon wasn't present, because it is the ministry of a deacon. So those are things, but if in the absence of a deacon, if it's a priest and laity, then I've been in places where that has happened and where it's not happened. So I think you have to work that out.
Okay,
Very hard.
Yeah.
Just for clarification, I'm not right up on the canon, but questions 2 and 3, sorry, yeah, 2 and 3 and 4. Will that involve changes to the canon, like something that would have to be passed at Synod, or with any of them? Or is the canon not even involved?
Like the lay incumbency?
Yes. Yes.
Which is
It's under one.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's under,
It's like one.
Yeah,
It's looking at one.
the incumbency, where this actually came to my mind was that one of my vestry books began in 1961. It was written by somebody that wrote his name in, and he was a lay incumbent put on beside it. So I have no idea what that would even be. But if we were looking at perhaps having someone look after a parish that wasn't a priest, what would that look like? And I imagine that would have to change everything from canons right down the line to policies and regulations. But that's something that's kind of beyond the scope
although, not to throw a monkey wrench into this, but we've done it in an interim capacity. We did that at St. Albans in Sydney when we had Ken McIntosh serve as we called him a pastoral administrator. We were trying something to see, like there was no priest who could be a priest in charge. He had an MDiv, Master of Divinity from the Atlantic School of Theology. He was a licensed lay minister. He was in the Collieries parish. He still couldn't do the Eucharistic ministry, but they were saying our licensed lay ministers are sort of overtaxed, and we knew he could lead, he could do funerals, and so there were things he could do that we felt maybe to have the parish pay him as a pastoral administrator was a possibility, and so we tried that. I think we're learning from that. I still see the possibility of something like that. I think we're in a time when structures and models of ministry are changing, and I think there's capacity for, I can imagine situations where we will have regional or semi-regional ministries where maybe there are paid lay people, not just, but I mean, you already have often, some parishes have a parish administrator or an admin assistant or someone like that in the office, but where you'd have somebody who has a pastoral role, who's got training and gifting in that area, who would be paid by the parish to do that kind of ministry. The Roman Catholic Church does this, and many of you know this. And where maybe clergy, the priests, would provide sacramental ministry, possibly in a supplemental way. And I'm just looking at the reality of numbers and the shift, and I just think the Spirit is asking us to consider different ways of doing ministry, not just, I think it's bigger than who gets to administer communion on Sunday morning. I think it's a whole, it might be a bigger shift than that. Because I think the time is coming when we don't have one priest in one parish. We haven't had that for a long time. So, I mean, is there a different way? So we can work towards that in an interim way without a canon change. But I think to look at it in a different, like in a bigger picture, more long-term permanent way, we would have to be thinking about canons or guidelines or something.
So probably that would apply to the next question, so thank you.
Okay, and we'll just get clear, and this question, and let me answer this question, then we'll go and get our picture taken, and then we'll come back. Okay?
Yeah.
Oh, Gail, sorry. Yeah.
She's a target. Would it be considered an okay practice if there's a group of licensed lay ministers who want to form an ad hoc group to respond to your call for proposal of the idea of a licensed lay minister who's attached to a parish and a regional licensed lay minister? Would it be all right if they formed their own group to submit this proposal? Because this is not sound like the kind of thing that one person can do on their own. I know that certain people that have this feeling of protocol, that if a group of people get together, it's not been mandated by an external body, that somehow or another they're breaking a kind of protocol. But I believe that there is a strong interest in this group to actually make that happen sooner rather than later.
Amen. I would say then it makes sense for this body, I know it's not an annual meeting, but you are a gathered group, to say, you know, we would like, if there's an interested group, like if that could emerge from this weekend, then I think that feels like it has endorsement from the body, so it kind of covers off. You know, it doesn't feel like it's a fringe group. You're not a fringe group. You know, you really are working with will and understand. Not that all of you want to be in doing that, but you recognize the need for it, the desire for it in some. So I think that's the way I would like to see it, but I think it could happen that way. But it would be nice if the group said, yeah, we support that, and yes, if there are people who want to work towards that, go for it.
So move.
So I was going to say, we have an executive meeting coming up.
I'm sorry.
We have an executive meeting coming up in October where we could formalize that a little bit more. Yeah.
And in fact, what we'll do is,
and Gail would be at that
people are
meeting.
interested in being on that committee, please let
Gail.
Any of us know, even your regional rep, anybody that's on executive.
Any of us know.
Yeah.
And we'll see about putting perhaps something together.
And regional deans and archdeacons meet again kind of mid-October-ish. So, you know, just to keep them in the loop, because that came up there too as a recommendation. So, and do we need to think about that again? So I think there's support for this. It's just keeping everybody informed. so that they can be the conduit to the rest of the clergy. That's just really helpful. People know this, that this is being looked at, and people have an opportunity to give some input.
All right. Yep, okay, get your robes on, and be on top.
superiority, but with Pauline patterns of ministry supporting church instead of the common pattern of church supporting ministry. Where bishops are signs and animators of the church's unity, Catholicity, and apostolic mission. Priests are signs and animators of her Eucharistic life and the sacramental presence of her great high priest. And deacons are signs and animators, living reminders of the church's servanthood as the body of Christ, who came as and is the servant slave of all God's beloved children. Let us dream of a church so salty and yeasty that it really would be missed if no longer around, where there was wild sowing of seeds and much rejoicing when they take root, but little concern for success, comparative economic ills, a community, an open, caring, sharing household of faith where all find embrace, acceptance, and affirmation. A community under judgment, seeking to live with its own proclamation, therefore truly loving what the Lord commands and desiring his promise. And finally, let us dream of a people called to recognize all absurdities in ourselves and in one another, including the absurdity that is love. Serious about the call and the mission, but not very much about ourselves. Who in the company of our Redeemer can dance and sing and laugh and cry in worship, in ministry, even in conflict. If you want a copy of that, find me on Facebook. It's Dr. Heather McCants. I just posted it, so you can find it there. So before I came here, I was in Montreal. And before I was in Montreal, I was in the Diocese of Rupert's Land, where I was the diocesan ministry developer, which is a great job title that excludes almost nothing. A couple of the things I did was to look at the ordination process and the equipping of folks for ordination, but also to staff and equip in what in that diocese was called local collaborative ministry teams. So in the Diocese of Rupert's Land, there are virtually no licensed lay ministers or lay readers. About 25 years ago, instead, there was an acknowledgement that within each parish community there was the need for ministry, and a whole bunch of those parishes, are very remote. The Diocese of Rupert's Land is southeastern Manitoba and northwestern Ontario. From Winnipeg, where the C office was, to St. Mary's Sioux Lookout was a 5.5-hour drive. To Red Lake, it was a 6.5-hour drive. And so, and the distance from one another, you couldn't get from Red Lake to Sioux Lookout. You had to go down to the Trans-Canada and across and back up again, right? So I'm familiar with the difficulties of rural and remote. And so what started to happen were two things. One is that a number of shared ministries were brought together. So in some cases it was Lutheran and Anglican, in some cases it was United Church and Anglican. And so those churches would come together. But the other thing that would happen in a lot of places was this local collaborative ministry. And so a parish would say, either we want to do this kind of ministry because we feel called to it, or we can't get a priest to come here even if we could afford to pay one, even part-time. And what was happening in some places was a neighboring priest would drive the 1.5, 2, 3 hours once a month, every 6 weeks, whatever, for Eucharist. And the rest of the time it would be morning prayer. And people were saying to the bishop and to the diocese, that's not church. Like, just showing up for an hour on Sunday is not church. We want to be church. And so they started to bring together teams of people who were primarily nominated from within the parish. And so the bishop would go, and then once I was hired, I would go. we would explain what this model was like. People would, on pieces of paper in the service bulletin, write down the name of the person they think was called to particular kinds of ministry. I've seen this person be an excellent minister of hospitality. This person has the gifts for administration. This person is excellent with children and young people, whatever it is, right? Those would all go into the offering plate at the offering, right? And then we would take them and we would contact those people. And we would say, your fellow parishioners have seen these gifts in you. From that, there would be a team of people. And in some places, it would be 6 or 8 people for this one parish community. In some places, they went into a cluster. And so there was one area where the churches were about half an hour apart, but there were 5 of them. And they formed one team. And from that team, there might be raised a locally ordained priest, like a cap priest here, 1 or 2 deacons. Sometimes there would be more than 1 priest. The priest would be responsible for sacrament. That was it, right? And then there would be maybe 3 or 4 preachers who would rotate, right? There would be somebody who would be doing all and the team would be trained together. They would have a mentor who was usually a seminary-trained priest, who would meet with them once a month, and they would do training, and there was no sort of end to the training. That was an ongoing thing forever. And they would say, well, we need more training in this. We're noticing we don't have that. And then that monthly get-together is when they would get together and plan the ministry of the parish together. The question of lay incumbency made me grin, because from those groups of people came the question, well, if we don't have, a bishop-appointed priest, can we have a lay incumbent? They brought it to Synod. It failed by 3 votes. Yeah, because, I don't remember. I think it was the clergy. But that model, it's sometimes been called total ministry, it's sometimes been called mutual ministry, but the idea that no one person is ever going to have all the gifts, right? And so even if you're in a church, the question that was asked about, does AST teach people how to be team players as they're coming through? I don't know. You've only been there 8 weeks. I just told you that. But the bishop and I were talking. He's like, I can teach people the need for team, but actually that training of a team, everybody has to do that together. Who's part of that team, right? So that's a different piece. So I think both and are probably needed. Anyway, so if you're interested in finding out more about that model of ministry, I'm happy to talk. If you were inspired by it, there is a North American-wide group called the Living Waters Cooperative, and there's a Facebook group, and I'm an administrator of it, so if you are interested and you're on Facebook and you want to find out more, you can jump on there. There's a monthly Zoom meeting just to share interests and ideas and questions and so on. And yeah, you'd be more than welcome. I know Francis Gerald Smith was part of that Zoom meeting. Lisa's jumped in a couple of times as well. So if you're interested, you could jump into that as well.
And this used to be called Living Stones.
Well, the Living Waters Cooperative grew out of Living Stones. The problem with Living Stones was the irony that you had to join as a full diocese, and then a bishop would retire, and then another bishop would come in who wasn't supportive, and then the whole diocese had to leave.
Because we were part of that, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
I remember going to a Living Stones conference in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
That's what I remember.
Winnipeg in winter, yeah.
It was not fun.
Yeah.
But it was a good conference.
So, yeah. So, yeah, if you got questions, I'm happy to talk about that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Open it up.
I had a question, if I may, about before the break. Is the Eucharistic ministry in the nursing home the same for a group as it is for individuals?
What do you mean? Can you clarify what?
Well, when you say you're going to a nursing home and you're going to do communion, does the same rules apply to if you're doing it to an individual or as part of a service for a lot of people?
It's meant to be that the way I understand the guidelines of the diocese is that it's meant to be individual, that people administer communion individually to folks. So there might be a gathered service, but people would be that you administer communion individually. Otherwise, it kind of is like the deacon's mass. So that's my understanding of what, yeah, and I don't know who wants to what can be said, you know.
No, that'd be my understanding as well. It is for the individuals rather than for the group. And if you do have a nursing home service, basically that's not when you offer the communion.
No.
It's for the individual rooms and the individual people.
Oh, I was gonna ask, you kind of answered it, but I was asking if they're at a service and you ask, would you like communion? If they're all together in an organized group, then that would be no, right? Okay.
That's a valid, yes.
Okay, and then all of a sudden I thought of a loophole, honestly. I hate to do that, but what if you had the service and then people kind of either on their own or through an offer wanted it, and you just set a time maybe in the future or that same day where you did it to them individually? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
I know it's kind of weird, but
I think that, I mean, what I've seen in nursing home services is that all kinds of folks gather.
Yes.
And all kinds of
Yep.
folks gather who
Some
don't
of
always
them-
even know what you're doing, what you're
No,
administering,
exactly, yep.
quite frankly. And I'm not, and I don't say that out of judgment, I say
Nope,
that out
nope.
of concern, that we
Yep.
might be offering something that they don't want,
Yes,
but don't
exactly.
know how
They
to
can't
say
consent
no
to it.
to. So I think that the idea of going individually, it's really clear that these are
Yes.
folks who
And
have
they're-
identified that,
Yeah.
that have a desire and
Yeah,
need or wish
exactly.
for this ministry, so that the nursing home service can minister to everybody there.
yes.
And,
Yes.
and some folks, I mean, when I've done services as a priest in nursing homes,
Mhm.
folks are coming from different traditions
Yes.
where
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
don't receive
Yeah.
wine, where,
Nope.
you know, it would be grape juice. So
Yeah.
we're kind of crossing a whole bunch of
You're a whole
lines there.
bunch of
And you're
lines,
just,
yeah.
I'm always concerned that are we ministering appropriately to that
Mhm.
individual?
Mhm.
So that when we're doing it one-on-one, you know, then it's a little bit different in that
Yeah.
regard. that
Yeah,
we're
it's like a consensual,
Yeah.
voluntary,
Yes.
yes, and I prefer that, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it also provides some degree of pastoral encounter
Yeah.
one-on-one
Yeah.
that the group doesn't there, which is another,
Yeah.
just another piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the priest can to the group though, can they?
Yeah. Priest can.
The priest can to the
Yeah.
group, because well, I mean, normally what I've done is I've actually consecrated, I don't take reserved sacrament, I would do a shortened service and consecrate the elements there. I didn't take reserved sacrament, I did take the consecration.
Yes.
Yeah.
I take communion to in-home communion and a nursing home and a hospital. I have been asked by the nursing homes if they would like the people to gather, like in the village hall, for instance, at the Elms. But my take on it is that if I give communion to a group, it's more like Holy Eucharist than communion. So, no, I do one-on-one, and it's a little service from the Book of Common Prayer. Everyone gets the same thing. I have the little individual cups with reserved sacrament and the wine, and they can't believe they're getting the wine. I said, you only get the real thing from me.
You're popular.
Yes. And so I do the pastoral visit too, because a lot of these people don't have family, they don't have someone to confide in. So the one-on-one works really well for them.
Yeah.
David,
Bishop, there seems to be an awful lot of confusion about having Eucharist in a nursing home. I'm wondering if maybe a pastoral letter or something from you outlining the practice for licensed lay ministers taking the Eucharist to nursing homes and how it should be done or not done.
It's reserved sacrament, it's not, you're not taking.
Well, whatever the terminology.
No, that's probably a good idea.
And it's obvious that this is a concern of,
Yeah.
of many of you, and it's probably something that you've been asked about in various settings. So that's good to know. How we deal with it is an ongoing conversation, Walter, and then
always better to ask for forgiveness before I ask for permission. I've had residents affirmed with the parish in a care facility in Windsor, and we travel down from our St. John the Evangelist Parish in Minnesota. They kindly have offered to meet in one apartment. Is that permissible? I have the license to do that. So they know each other, they're comfortable, so there's 3 of us at the table. Is that all right?
And I think that the intention of that is that us taking communion to shut-ins is about, it's the ancient practice of the church to take the communion elements to those who were unable to be gathered with the community. So I mean, that to me is consistent with that's
So
what that ministry is.
Yeah.
That's consistent with that,
I hear this one-on-one thing, and I do a lot of that.
Well, I mean, I don't know, I'm not saying it has to, it could be a complement of friends, it could be, that's not the truth. Yeah, I'm thinking not your general service in the nursing home, which tends to be very ecumenical. And folks that again have no tradition at all, and again, you've got folks with, and I'm not worried about, like, is God going to be upset about it? But that's not my worry. My worry is this appropriate? This is not this person's tradition. Am I kind of stepping over a line by offering something?
Give it to a
And the
Muslim.
family might say, what are you doing? Like, we're not Anglican, or we're not this, or my mother doesn't take lunch, and then I don't know. But we don't have that relationship with that gathered community.
But I continue with my pastoral
Even as a
visit.
priest.
I do my pastoral visit individually with one, and then I go to the other apartment with their permission. In case there's something of concern individually that we don't share with you. So I'm.
Oh, that's fine. I mean, I'm not thinking one-on-one in that way. It's
No.
just not
Very good.
not
I need to
a
break the
communion
rules.
service.
It's true.
Billy.
Some of the talk, it just kind of reminded me, I used to do hospital pastoral visiting way back in the late 80s and 90s. I wasn't a lay minister then. But there came a point when they kind of cut that, we had teams, and we'd go to the Dartmouth General, and there were priests who did it, but we would also visit anybody who was listed as Anglican. But I've since been told that they stopped that. So it hasn't been reinstated. But it was something that I found in a number of cases, meeting people, that it meant a great deal to them to have somebody from the church come. And I think what got me interested was when my own mother was dying of cancer, and it made a difference to her to have somebody she could talk to, because she didn't want to let that out to family. And that sort of thing. And I found, and of course we did it sort of under the guidance of Reverend Joey Clark at the time, and that sort of thing, so we had feedback and that sort of thing. But I think that, and I think sometimes people are even maybe more comfortable talking to a lay person than they are a priest if they've been away from the church for a while, and that sort of thing. So I don't know if anything can be done about that.
I think it's all specific area. I mean, it's all, there's no cohesive, there's no policy. I mean, even hospital visits, when I was serving in the Valley as a parish priest, we weren't allowed to visit in the hospital unless we took the visit away from a family member that particular day or week sometimes. But then when my mother went into hospital in Halifax, she could have any number of visitors in a day as long as there were no more than 2 at one time. And I couldn't understand how Valley Regional could have such a different policy when I was told it was provincial policy. And the chaplain said, you need to know that what you're putting forward is not provincial policy, because here's my situation with my mother, but I can't visit my parishioner. So it doesn't feel like there's a cohesive policy, whether it's Nova Scotia Health or even some facilities that might be affiliated. They may have different policies and practices in each place. If there's a way to kind of advocate for pastoral care and the ability to go in and do these visits, I'm happy to do that in whatever way we can. We've been doing some of that with spiritual health, with Nova Scotia Health, because there's been some concerns that spiritual care has been not a priority and has been pushed out of some of the facilities and hospitals. And so we have been trying to advocate there, figuring out what's happening where and how do we advocate and who do we talk to and how do we remind people that this is really valuable ministry and people are trained for this ministry and this is really important. It's not just about their physical care, but their spiritual care, which impacts their physical health. Studies show that. So, so if you think there's ways we can advocate, some of the clergy have reached out that way too and said, we can't get into the hospital, our care teams can't get in, what can you do? So if we can do something there, I'm happy to write, or I would need to know kind of where, because it is not the same across the board.
Can I just want to add to her comment. Is that okay? In our area, what they told us to do was have the patient or the resident request the presence of the minister or the lay people, and they accepted that to get in. I don't know if they would do that anywhere, but that's what we were told.
That's what they do better.
Is it? Yeah.
But anyway, if there's anything we can do to support that, because I just know that's been important.
So could a letter go to each of the nursing homes asking if this would be?
It's not the same in every nursing home.
No, but I know, but could we do that and ask?
And different health authorities have different.
Oh.
I think there's probably a provincial minimum, and then some places decide to do things a little differently, right? But as long as they maintain whatever the minimum standard is.
I mean, my personal opinion on this, maybe I shouldn't be stating it, but I've had people in care homes like, no. I'm trying to be really diplomatic about this, but sometimes it's a lot easier when there aren't a lot of people visiting. And I don't think that's a good thing. But I've seen that, and I think there's a need to sort of push back and say, sometimes this is for the care of the whole person, and our loved ones, our friends, parishioners, people in our communities have a right to have care that is beyond what doctors and nurses and other people do support that. But it feels like in some places since COVID, even though restrictions have relaxed in so many other ways, this hasn't, and it's a concern to me because I do think that it impacts physical health, it impacts around loneliness and well-being in general, spiritual health. I think that if we can do that and find appropriate ways to push and say, we really think that you're impacting negatively on people's health and well-being. And we've kind of said that around some of the other spiritual health matters around the clinical pastoral education training, that we're concerned because it's demonstrated that this stuff impacts positively on physical health as well as the others, and we really feel that Nova Scotia Health, whoever it might be, needs to kind of make some changes to enable that to happen again. So I think people have become settled in new patterns and new routines. This is sometimes a little inconvenient, but it's important all the same. I don't know. Some of you might be healthcare professionals. I'm not trying to be dismissive of that. I recognize it's a hard job, but I also think.
I just wonder if the letter could go to whoever the person is in charge of healthcare for the province.
You want to say anything about that? We're kind of working on that. We're starting with, because there has been an issue identified with training piece that those in training for ministry, for ordained ministry do. And we've also named the erosion of spiritual health, spiritual care in healthcare facilities particularly. So that's kind of the next step is to we're trying to deal with this piece first because it has very immediate impacts on training needs of students and ability to graduate and all those kinds of things, plus agreements between the provincial government and the schools that train them. But then we've also identified and named that in a letter that has gone to the highest levels of Nova Scotia Health to say, we see this and we're concerned about it. So then it's what's the next step? We don't know that yet. We're on it. So it's my point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, David, Annie, and then Stephen.
On the topic of the nursing home. I volunteered at the nursing home for maybe 5 years after I retired. And they really need someone in there, and they have a priest coming in once a month. But my question is, they advertise in the nursing home bulletin every month of, say, there's an Anglican church service this time with communion or whatever. But I was told, as a licensed lay minister, we were not allowed to have them advertise that we were coming in the nursing home. So I'm wondering why that.
The nursing home would have to tell you that. It's not the same everywhere.
Yeah, but no, this came from someone in the diocese that said to us, they are not allowed to advertise. It was one of our priests that
That's
we
not
had.
consistent with my experience as a parish priest. It's not consistent with my experience as a parish priest in places I've been, so I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why that would be.
No,
I'm
that's
not
what I
aware
was
of it. I've
wondering,
never
why
heard
they-
that. I've never heard that before, so I don't know.
No, I didn't
Yeah.
until this priest came in and.
In fact, you would want to do that so that people would know
Mm-hmm.
that that's what they're going to.
Yeah.
So that they can choose if it's a hymn sing versus communion, not that people say, oh, I'm only here for the music. I don't know, because I don't know
Could I
anything
say
about
something to
Okay,
that?
thank you.
I'm the same parish as David, and it was just a little misunderstanding. The person didn't quite understand. The priest who said that did not understand what was happening. And so they said, you're not allowed to advertise it as an Anglican communion service,
Yeah.
but it was not correct. What you can't do is say it's just a hymn sing and then spring communion on it.
That makes sense.
I'll just be a second.
Go ahead.
I just want to clarify, anybody that goes into a nursing home, I was a nurse in a nursing home, that's why I'm saying this. Anyone that goes into a nursing home to give communion, make sure that they're allowed to drink and they're allowed to eat and they can swallow.
Yeah.
Because I was with a priest one day, a Roman Catholic priest, and I had to swipe the man's mouth to take the piece of communion out and give it back to him, because the man couldn't swallow it. So just be on your guard for that kind of stuff.
More reason to let the people know what you're doing.
Yeah, what you're doing, like, don't go in and spring communion on them and say, well, like, so-and-so dropped their communion, or he's choking now, because you gave him a drink of wine, that he's not allowed to have a drink of anything. That kind of stuff. Just for your own legal aspects of it, to just walk in there. That's the only thing I had to say.
Yeah, and Louise, you're.
Sorry, I'll be brief. There are privacy laws.
Yes.
And I remember the days when I could go into the old VG, and influence the Anglicans and the Catholics, and who was there, and who visited. There are privacy laws now, and they're not even allowed to be asked their religion. So we have to be very aware of that. I have a friend in a nursing home, and I wouldn't think of going to give her communion without permission from her daughter. So if you can get a contact there, if it means that much, if you can get a contact, that's good. But the hospital, I had my sights on that being my ministry, but it has so totally changed that with the privacy laws, that I had to change direction.
I would say too that sometimes the privacy laws are excessive and they're not actually, when we've done some testing about with folks who can tell us about privacy law, if you're asking permission, if someone isn't, because the thing about asking somebody when they're admitted to a hospital is that that's an avenue to care. And if you're, you don't know if somebody admitting somebody, if that person is a faithful communicant in the parish, it will be important for them to have communion if it's at all possible, or if they were dying at last rites, or if they're unction, like to have somebody come and pray with them. So, I mean, it's how, again, it's that whole collaborative model, like how we reinforce that we're there to work with and not against the healthcare system. We're there to offer that other aspect of care that's kind of integrated healthcare. So, yeah. So I know if I hear those things, because that's some of the questions about clergy not having access to spaces where lists are kept, and like this is all stuff I'm aware of and keeping an eye on, because I think that we're creeping into places that I think it's going beyond privacy. I think it's taking it a bit far, and I say that as somebody who's talked to people who have legal backgrounds who would argue that too, because we're not violating it if they give permission. And you can ask and they can say no religion. Like you're not telling them, they don't have to tell you anything, even if they're Anglican, they don't have to say. You can say, would you like to let us know? There's ways to phrase questions that we don't. So I think it's a kind of an easy answer to a much more complicated situation. It's a little too nitty-gritty.
I'm aware of timelines as well. We'll have Stephen's question, then Jordan's question, and then we'll move into evening prayer. And then we'll have a session. What time is supper? 5.
Oh, it's good.
We got lots of time.
Okay, well, let's continue this for a while. We have evening prayer at 4:15 or so.
Supposed to be 3:45.
Yeah, it's 3:45 now. What happened to break?
I don't need to ask my question, I can just ask it individually to people. Let him go.
Okay, then we'll continue on for another 20 minutes or so.
I mean, if they've provided tea coffee, should we just say if anybody wants it?
Yeah,
Just
there's
want them to be wasting food. I'm only speaking for.
There's only certain people that woke up and said no. If the food's out there, we should be.
There's muffins and fruit out there.
Just
Probably tea and coffee.
him ask his question first.
You all don't have to do the same thing just because you're Anglican.
We've always done it that way.
How about if we do have questions from Stephen and Jordan, and then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back.
All right. Speaking from my experience with Mom, she went to the hospital in December. She went to the hospital in December. She never left the hospital. But I was allowed to name 2 other caregivers to go and visit her because she was on a lockdown ward.
Right.
As long as the people are at the nursing station, right? And then Catherine and Mary Nicholas Jeffrey are the pastoral care visitors. But if I wanted to bring somebody else in, I'd have to let the nursing station know who and who to take off at certain times. But when Mom went to palliative care,
That changed.
that changed.
Yeah.
But she was still in the same ward, but the restrictions sort of changed.
Yeah.
But it was up to my decision who could visit. And that was posted outside the doors of the ward. Now, I can't speak for the other floors or other wards or anything. This was a lockdown. Only 3 caregivers, but only 1 at a time. I was fine with that because I knew going in what was going on. And Mom would have her dementia. I understand it would have really confused her more than.
I have, actually, luckily that's empty. I have a similar experience to Stephen, when my, 2 different ones. So my grandmother in Kentville was very sudden death, and she ended up going right to the ER and up to ICU because she had barely hours to live. But thankfully, my mom got a call and was basically right there with her after the fire department and the EHS took her up to Valley Regional. And she's an RN and now works in the hospital again. But my aunt would say that my mom Jennifer went into nursing mode very quickly and was able to pull people together. And that kind of leads me into what I'm thinking is you kind of need an ally who knows the system. And my question is since both my parents are support or literal healthcare workers, is there any way that we reach out and do a chaplaincy type thing with the healthcare workers in the hospitals? Because I think if you make the staff aware that are Christian or religious or whatever themselves, or have an interest in any kind of spiritual care, whatever that may be, even from other faiths and denominations, I think that makes the job easier in some ways for people in ministry, lay or ordained, to get in there. The same with my grandfather at Fisherman's Memorial in Lunenburg. It was good that my Aunt Joy and my cousin Krista had experience in the United Church and were able to fit it in decently. I mean, it was on the Veterans Affairs unit, so they were a bit better at that. But again, I think like having either a plan in place or having someone who knows how to navigate that system is great. So I just wonder, I mean, it's more of a statement than a question, but I'm thinking, related to the privacy thing too, I think having those coordinators within the system, because I've talked to people on our primary care panel, one of them was a patient-family relations team member in HRM and the Central Zone, and that is something that I've made contact with her, and when I said I was involved with the Anglican Church, she was very interested in it from a spiritual care perspective, and that family-patient relations could probably be a bridge within Nova Scotia Health in that manner. And then on protection of privacy, my mom working at Nova Scotia Health, there's literally privacy firewalls between them, Department of Health and Department of Community Services, and so on and so forth. No one wants to risk anything, so that's unfortunately why it is the way it is.
Ten minutes?
Can I just mention one thing before everybody starts
Yeah.
with coffee? Pauline Liam, who was a wonderful, faithful, licensed lay minister, passed away very peacefully, probably about a month or so ago. Anyway, they're having a Vesper memoriam for her at 4 o'clock. So please keep everybody first.
And Pauline was such a big force in this association.
Yes.
And she was a character that was larger than life, with a sense of humor that was gigantic. And so she is sincerely missed.
There was no such thing as a roadblock, Pauline.
Can I ask a question? You were maybe the executive.
Oh, she is wonderful.
In cases like that where we have lay ministers who pass away, how is the lay ministers list maintained, the active list maintained?
That's a very good question, because I'm part of that. We don't know. Our list differs from the list that's are contained at the diocese. And we've had interactions between.
How to do that, because every month it changes.
Yeah.
And every year it changes, and people drop off, and we don't always know who drops off.
So,
I was going to say, I think the easiest thing is if the regional reps know when they're reaching out to the parishes, if they find out about changes, they can send them in.
Who do they notify?
Me for one.
Yeah, Dave is the most important because he maintains the list.
So at the end of the year, when the annual reports are done and we send in the dues, that's done, and we're sending in, I can only speak for my parish.
Yes.
So we send in the active lay ministers and
Yes.
whatever amount is owing, and does that go to you, David?
No.
That goes to Joanne.
Okay, it goes to the treasurer. And then Joanne, so from that information, are you updating if there's changes on that list?
So she's only been the treasurer for about a month. We
But yes,
we have talked a little bit about that.
I'm in the process of data entering everybody who has registered in the diocese and their parishes. Now, I have to be upfront and honest, not every parish sends in that list.
That's right.
Okay, so I will be I am being prompted to send out a 6-month reminder for people who haven't paid their dues. However, I don't have any enforcement to that.
No, and there isn't any enforcement.
So there's no way that we can be assured of a list that's up to date, because this is not a regulatory body.
So
and her dot entry is going to be delayed slightly by.
Yeah, my finger. Yeah.
So for PE
DEI.
Yes.
Currently, in the next week, I'm going to be in touch with each of our parishes to find out who their active lay ministers are.
Great.
I send that to you and David.
Yes,
You have
please.
to
That would
list?
That'd be wonderful.
Yes.
Okay.
You said the magic word, active.
Yes.
What about the inactive?
Well,
There's-
so can we just leave them on the list and identify them as that, or?
That's what we have to do.
What we do in our parishes, we ask them if they want to remain active. And if, even if they're not active, if they want to stay on the list, they stay on the list.
Okay. So I'll identify them.
Can you just hold off on the questions for, and let's go for a 10-minute break. We'll gather up back here. It usually takes 5 minutes to line up anyway. So let's gather back here at 10 after 4.
Barb. Barb.
Excuse me, I'm going to. How are you? Whatever it is for the license plate. But I remember that.
No, but there are, like, there is,
Like this is just one of the things.
Yep. You don't want to, you don't bring your life down. I use mine.
It's just a lanyard.
Lanyard with an name on it, but I like it. I keep my feet with it. No, yeah, give me too much out of fat. $5, yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much, kind sir.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying to do any treatment.
Get my other one.
Yeah.
And then I wondered if you were going to be here with the new one. Because I have the S one, but doesn't have the license.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's great. And this one would have the license plate minister, does it?
Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. That's the old.
I have this.
Okay, then I'll do it if we don't.
I got this from you before.
Okay, I don't need that.
No, I was into your home.
I'll give you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, these are the old pins.
Yeah, no, I have that.
I got a whole bunch of these, so we didn't bother getting new ones.
No. And will you be getting new ones? Probably
Not for a while because I got quite a few.
This is what I really wanted because
Okay,
Thank you so much.
I'll drive Joanne crazy. Give Joanne some more money.
Well, that's good. This is nice.
And then there's apps, that question that came up earlier.
That's good. I had the old pins.
What's that?
I had the old pins. They're not the new pins. They're not the licensed.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No, I was looking for
Well, the thing is, I have the old one, and I picked them up. There's two ladies, and my licensed lay ministers. And she's working together. So, yeah, we both have it.
Yeah, and for me, it was just, I just thought, well, now I've got a backup. My other one, because even today, I was on I know I put it in my pocket. So now it'll be the next one, I'll have that back.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm gonna take some of these and put them out in the church, because there might be more now that are interested, because we have lots of readers now. Well, we have more lay readers.
Oh, we have,
We have some. Yeah, we have 2, 4, 6, we have 9 lay readers, but they might like to move forward now.
We only have 6 active ones, and that's between our 5 churches.
Oh, yeah.
And no ministers, so you can imagine how, so.
That's really good to have all them.
Yeah. I don't think it's all them. I think to myself, I don't have anywhere near, that's why it makes, we're talking about what more can we do? And I think,
Well, that's why if you have it's like everything else. You get it for life.
And like I was board, parish council chairperson. You know, like it just, I'm in the choir when I'm not at the front. It goes on and on. Yeah. And you know, no fault of anybody except me saying, okay.
I know, I'm the
But
same way.
I'm doing very good now.
Yeah, me too. I've got to the point
I've
where I
said it
can
a
say
couple
no,
times
those
this
are
year.
well, they're not the organization.
Yes, things the old,
And she
yeah.
went to
And yeah, there's that
because there's
point.
no more time.
Yeah.
I never volunteer my community and as people church. You name it.
Yeah. And my husband's not a church goer, so he's Roman Catholic. He's not active Roman Catholic. So anytime we like I do the church, it's away from him. You know, so there's got to be that work-life balance. Yes. Yeah. Even sometimes.
I know exactly.
It's not the previous misunderstanding.
Oh, go in and see.
To make sure we're following the process. Who's understanding?
Okay.
I don't know if it speaks to anybody else.
I'm so trying to be used to it. There's just so much going on.
We have a question. We have a question. We have a question.
Just recognizing the churches and
May or may not have answers, but.
So, a number of years ago, I took the geology ministry. And you can probably do a higher version of that training. But we would go down, and I found this really good because we brought together the class that we were part of. We would go down 1 weekend for lunch. We have a Friday
Monday night class, morning and afternoon. And that way, you know, you have this.
Yeah, it's not online.
It's not online. It could be, yeah, it could be. But it allowed that interaction that sometimes you don't get.
Erica.
And that's great. But I would just, it's not the same.
I mean, for the course, the class itself, it's not that, but it's what we're doing right now, which is great.
It's in the always.
Yes, that's right.
I mean, we stayed at that point, so we stayed, I was school there 2 hours working. Yeah, we should. And this is when they were still, this is when she was somebody.
And then I went.
Just outside of Halifax there. And she, we would like, there's a lady from the United Church, the two of us would travel last.
Right.
So she would go, she'd go over to TV, have a beer, whatever, they just did their thing at the class. Val and I would go at 4 o'clock. Because Val was like, she wanted to know everything, so she was talking. And so we would have, but I learned more, but that was those opportunities, you know, that you would miss.
That's an interesting.
Especially my notes in there.
My dad was one of the best friends with his brother John. John Spencer. John and I.
Right, and so how do we make this work within this? Because they can choose to go into certain hours, like there are trainings there. But on the other hand, we still have the space and so much technology and so many, you know, my faculty are teaching it. If they're not able to, because of their constraints, you can bring in folks like Lisa,
Right.
bring in, you know, and do it that way. Right.
So currently, right now, do you know, you have them in there, what's the courses for both of them online or?
I believe so.
Is that right? Two of them are like doing summer.
Oh, okay. There's the summer intensives and which ones are offered in different intensives. Right, and that's just because, like, for folks who are in the 5-year summer intensive,
Right.
active program, they have to make sure that in those 5 years, they can have everything they just agreed.
5 years summer intensive.
So let's get a master of divinity, to get a master, you do master of divinity in 5 years. By doing 6 weeks of courses testing each of those summers, and then in between, living your life, right? And for the United Church Guard, because they have, they're usually after graduation, they graduate from university. It's like supervised ministry. But we've made an arrangement with the United Church of Canada. So they finish their 5 years.
They're done their 5 years.
Right, which is the same as doing less than 2 years. So it's that process. So most of the and I tell you, as a church, 2,000 years, they're even here to well, I was
Right,
yeah, and that's just, although some, I mean, I don't know if I see it.
and you're just,
Mary, start us off.
Okay, this is just a curiosity question, not really, you know, related to the business we're talking about. When did the stole go away and why did it go away? The blue stole. When I got my first awl, the gentleman that gave it to me, it was his, and he brought it over to my house and said he wanted me to have it, and it came with the stole. But I was told, I don't know how they told me, but not to wear it. So, yeah.
It's a blue lay reader's preaching scarf.
At least 20 years ago.
It has been since the 1980s, so it's a little bit previous to my time. And it was to save on confusion between licensed lay ministers and the clergy.
Yeah.
And that was, and there was oftentimes, somebody would see a clergy, a licensed lay minister come in, and they'd be wearing the scarf, and they would just think, well, you were just regular clergy. And that was the reason, that was the rationale back in the 80s.
Okay, I just, like I say, it was just a curiosity question.
So the dress code here is for you to wear a surplice, a cassock or surplice, or an all with the medallion.
With the medallion.
And the preaching scarf should be discouraged. I'm aware that there are parishes in this diocese where the preaching scarf has continued, and guess what? I'm not going to.
Pick your battles.
But by and large, that was the reason for, that was the rationale why it was discontinued.
Okay, thank you very much.
Can I want to ask, is it okay, is it my turn? I want to ask about your licensed lay minister. Do you require that to change every time we have a new bishop?
No, because it says and successors.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you
But
don't
when the
have.
clergy change, you're meant to be replaced under the new rector.
Yeah.
When you have a new rector in your parish, the understanding that I've always had is that you relicense your licensed lay ministers and your honorary assistants, and so that those folks are, you relicense them. That's what I've always done as a rector.
How do you do, what does that mean? Is that a new piece of paper?
No.
Yes.
It is a new piece of paper?
Yeah, because it actually has your rector's name on it.
Yeah.
Your license has your rector's name on it, or, you know, you wouldn't really have one if it's a priest in charge. You keep it. If it's a priest in charge and you had a rector previous, you just keep it. But if there's a new rector appointed, there would be an application to just update it, that's all, and you get a new license.
Just when there's a new rector.
When there's a new rector.
I
Because the rector's name is on.
Do all rectors know that?
I don't know.
What about ones that just moved from New Brunswick?
I will just say that one of the things we're doing though, around new clergy coming into the diocese is we've started doing orientation sessions for newly ordained and clergy new to the diocese.
Right.
So they come in, sometimes it's when we do the service of institution, that's very brief, that happens before the celebration of new ministry. So we do that, we introduce them to the diocesan staff. They can ask questions about who does what and when should I be in touch with you, or what do you expect from me? What paperwork? Because often you don't know, I came new to this diocese from Newfoundland, and I knew nothing about a parochial return because I've been a curate, and you don't know what you don't know. So I didn't know to ask about a parochial return because I didn't know it existed. So like that's the stuff when you're new to the diocese, you don't even know. You've not been formed here, you've not done placements here. So it's our job to acquaint them with those kinds of things. That might be something though that gets missed. So I will add that to our list of things. But it should come up under the celebration of new ministry.
My license is from Bishop Fred Hiltz, who commissioned me to go out and administer whatever I was needed to do.
But you're also in the parish that now has priests in charge as opposed to.
Yeah, but we had other precincts before that. After
We're supposed to have renewed.
Bishop Fred Hiltz.
To be reminding the new rector about what has to be done.
Well, again, the celebration of new ministry, sometimes it happens there, sometimes it doesn't, but the fact that it needs to happen is part of that conversation.
Well, does that mean I'm not a licensed?
No, you're definitely licensed, don't worry about it.
You don't get supper tonight, that's all.
Tom did come and share a session with the current newly ordained group. So there are 4 newly ordained groups that priests that do understand the policy.
Yeah, no, well.
Because the information has been shared.
I never asked a question, I just assumed that I was available to help, and I just continued to help.
Normally you would get
So what happens in our case?
Your case is quite.
You have an extended priest in charge, ask your priest in charge.
I knew you were gonna do that.
And my understanding is that you're actually licensed Your existing license was extenuated under the term of.
Yeah, with under Christian too.
Unless there's a new rec.
Unless there's a new rec.
It doesn't, you're not unable to engage in ministry in between. That's not the it's just that it changes when there's a new rector. If you don't have a new rector, your current license is still appropriate and active, it's valid, yes.
So that's still for a priest in charge that they're considered?
I mean, you just continue, yeah.
I
I
would
mean,
just
you don't get a
continue.
new one under a priest in charge, you just continue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's what I was,
Even if we don't
stop. Are we assuming that, or is it assumed that every lay minister would get a license with the new priest?
Yes.
So there's no ifs, ands, or buts, regardless?
No, that's not exactly, no.
When you get a new priest, what happens is that there's a request for the licenses to be reissued under the priest. Is that what you were asking?
Yes, so I'm just assuming if we get a new priest tomorrow, I'm assuming I will be reinstated or re-licensed. But what if I have a conflict between the minister and myself?
You know what, a new priest can actually turn around and say, no, I'm not working with them.
They can take it away.
You know, that,
Yeah.
because it really is under the, you are licensed. Under the
So I could lose my, technically I can lose my license to do.
Or at least have it go in abeyance for a while, I don't know.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
That very rarely happens. But it has happened.
It has happened.
Yeah, and I'm more aware that it's happened as well.
Thinking of a different direction.
It's one of the challenges though, because licensed lay ministers are raised up not only by a rector but through a parish. Like, I mean, I always had a parish council ratify and approve the names so that there was a paper trail, there was endorsement by the congregation. So I think it's one of those things we have to continue to work with newly ordained, with clergy to say, like, well, under what conditions would you not relicense somebody? Or would you remove a license? Because I think those are pretty, you know, one of the clergy I was talking to this week said, well, you'd never do that. That would just be, you know, how would you come into a new parish and not reissue? Like, under what it would have to be pretty extreme for you not to do that, because why wouldn't you? So, I think that's generally what happens. But if there isn't a renewal, then, I mean, that's where I would think someone like Tom, your role would come in as warden, that licensed lay minister should talk to probably to Tom as warden of licensed lay minister, and just kind of figure out, and hopefully there could be some clarity about why there would be a problem.
If I may, I mean, you'd also want to have a conversation with that new rector about whether your role will change, right? Like, we were talking earlier about different gifts. So the rector who's left had different gifts than the one who's come in, and so they may ask you to do different things so that as a team, you've got all those gifts covered, right? And all of those roles covered. Which doesn't mean you can't say, no, I'm not good at that either, so I guess we're just out of luck. I mean, you can do that, but I think that is the moment to have that conversation, is when you're having a conversation about having a license redone. And I know in parishes where I was, I had, you know, honorary associates, and we had those conversations as well in those cases.
So what are the priests asking you? The new ones coming in? Are the questions they're asking about the lay people?
No, I would be consulted if they had a problem about relicensing.
No. The gentleman beside us. Douglas. What questions are they asking you around?
The new priests, I think the reason that Tom came was because there was a learning gap with the newly ordained and a question. So Tom was invited to come and spend some time with the newly ordained around their questions, or so that we could fill in that learning gap that they did not have.
I have written down, talk to a formation officer about having licensed lay ministers on their formation curriculum. I wrote that down already.
and actually, Marvin actually joined me that time when we talked about it.
And it was very open discussion. The new newly ordained were very receptive to what we had to say.
Yeah, and if you have issues, then you should always bring them to the table. And then don't hesitate. This is your person to clarify.
I had my hand up.
I had my hand up.
Before the break, there was an open discussion a little bit about the databases, or whatever you want to call them, that are current for active lay minister. And I asked the question, on the parochial return, is there in fact, in one of the columns, a request for identification of active lay ministers?
On the parish information form.
And so could that, I mean, that always assumes the parish fills it in, but if it's filled in, could that be the basis of what's sent to David?
That is what we get.
That is, because the question before didn't sound like that.
Yeah.
And in fact, Victoria Hedrickson did a lot of work with our database for trying to get the date, and the list as updated as possible. And she did a tremendous amount of work with that, and tried to pool all the different sources of information. The only thing is that it keeps changing.
Yeah.
And we've had people on that list that were dead for like 10 years. And, you know, we just kept on sending letters out to them.
Well, you are, but if in fact a minister is signing in on an annual parochial return, you'd think there'd be some obligation to make that, that's the source of what should be the accurate statement.
You're correct.
I know the intention is to move towards a data entry system where, this is my understanding, where clergy or someone in the parish would enter that sort of live into a system, which would mean we don't have to enter it from a printed copy or something that's there. And then you'd have a way to get into that to update it anytime it changes. So if one of your licensed lay ministers dies, you have access to that, to your piece of that database where you could go in and change that information. So that hopefully it's continually updated.
And hopefully someone in David's role would have access to that.
Right, yes.
There would need to be a connection with the executive.
So my second question, and I have a conflict of interest, and I don't want to make a bone of contention about it, but to go back to an earlier conversation about clergy, people who identify their interest in becoming clergy and coming forward for discernment, claiming a call from God. And I have a problem with that when it doesn't include a call to team ministry. If they can't clarify that, if they can't show that in their work before they claim that call, someone needs to say at AST or somewhere, you need to work on that. And the presidents of Dalhousie University and 4 other universities, now if they are a new president, they have 100 days to prove to the Board of Governors that they have in fact spoken with all the deans and all of the major committee chairs, and can come to the Board of Governors identifying the strengths and weaknesses of the leadership of the university before they can make changes.
Right.
And it seems to me that the ministry should be the same. A new minister in my opinion, they shouldn't be elected until they can identify to the wardens who the leadership skills are in the parish, what the committee chairs are doing, what skills they bring to that ministry, and how they're going to work with that ministry team to create a community of care and ministry. Because that's, in my opinion, through many parishes, not happening.
Amen.
I can speak to some things, just to let you know, because things have changed in some respects. So I would say that I think, at least certainly in the first probably 2 years of my ministry as bishop, the biggest amount of time I spent has been, if it was any one group, it was with discernment and formation, and Douglas knows, because they normally met 3 or 4 times a year, and we met monthly for like a good chunk of time. We were doing a lot of work because we were recognizing some of these problems, and it's the whole, you know, if you keep finding people in the water downriver, you need to stop, not just pull them out, but go up and figure out why they're falling in.
Yeah.
So we're trying to go upstream and figure out what's happening. So some of the things we have done, I mean, there is now a comprehensive psychological assessment that happens before those who identify that sense of call would go to APCO, which is the discernment, some of you know, advisory committee on postulants for ordination. So before they're recommended to enter an ordination program, which still has to be affirmed by the bishop. They do this psychological assessment. It is comprehensive through the Southdown Institute, which is recognized as a group that works with the churches and clergy, so we do that. So, and I've made it really clear to folks, and Douglas will have heard it and can confirm or not, that we all, the communication between the people who are part of discernment and formation needs to be pretty transparent. When folks sign on as a postulant, they indicate that they know that information is going to be shared with those who are part of their learning. You know, I mean, it's not everybody, but it's the people. So if AST faculty see something, they need to flag it. Like, I can't find that out in year 3 if it was known in year 1. So if you see it in year 1, then how does it get picked up in the placement that happens in the summer? Or if someone in a parish placement picks up something, how does that get shared with some? And then how do we test to see if there's been growth? Okay, how do you say, you need to work on this? You identify it to the person, you say, we don't see evidence that you're a team player here. That's going to be critical in the church. So we need you to work on that. Maybe there's some conversation about, well, how do you work on that? How do you build growth in that area? But then we flag it and say, okay, what have you done? How have you worked on that? Tell me how you've worked on that. What have you done? And then are we seeing results from that? So I just want to let you know that we do see some of that, and we're looking at how to, you know, put the pieces together. So that everybody has a voice in this, and what you see is valid. Like, if you experience something in the classroom that we might not in a parish placement, we need to know. Like, and maybe everyone's experiencing it, no one's talking about it. But if you know that 3 people have the same experience of an individual, I need to know, but each other, you each need to inform the other. Again, we're trying to help the church develop strong and healthy leaders, team, as you said, and team leaders and team participants. So if we don't have that information, we can't do that. So again, I would mean mostly that we are really working towards that and trying to make sure there's accountability for something. But it only starts when
I'm
it
not
starts at a
suggesting that
certain
the
point.
team,
No.
the minister has to make the team work.
No, I know that too.
No.
I know.
You mentioned
You have to be
before,
willing, sorry.
You have to
that's
be
what I said.
willing to
Just-
bring,
yeah.
to understand the team.
Yeah.
Let's say you have
Yeah.
4 or 5 lay readers.
Yeah.
Does the minister understand the strengths of those 4 or 5?
Right, yeah.
And can they demonstrate their ability to delegate responsibility and see that it's carried out? And I just want to support you if you're working in that direction, because man, it's a missing.
And the other piece of that is the parish needs to be able to identify, should also, and if they don't know what the gifts of their licensed lay ministers are, they could ask them.
They could ask.
Or ask somebody who knows.
Who knows.
And even if they have deacons, because I've had this conversation with deacons, I've had this conversation with the associate priests as well, who kind of get caught in the middle when there's a transition and have had a ministry really valued and not valued. So we've talked about, well, how do we close the gap there? But some of that comes back to parish to say, we have licensed lay ministers, we have a team ministry here. We're not interested in somebody who can't be part of the team, who can't work collaboratively in a team, which means identifying gifts, utilizing gifts, recognizing that you don't have all the gifts, all that kind of thing, knowing what you're not good at so that you can let someone else do it like that. But that is critical. So thanks for raising it, but we are working on it. Yeah.
I'm aware of timelines, and right now it's 25 to 5.
Yep.
We'll move into evening prayer, so I'll just ask people to go get your books, and then we'll go directly to evening prayer. And BCP. Book of Common
Now it's